You've been lied to about overthinking. They told you it's a sign of intelligence, that it proves you care, that if you keep replaying every detail, you'll eventually feel safe. But if that were true, why do you still find yourself lying awake at night, restless and exhausted, while the same thoughts circle like vultures overhead? Why do you keep rewriting conversations in your mind, searching for the perfect response that never arrives? Why does your brain drag you into the past and hurl you into the future, yet never allow you to rest in the peace of now? The truth is, overthinking doesn't solve problems, it multiplies them. It doesn't protect you, it drains you. And the more you chase certainty inside your head, the further you drift from real calm. But there is another way. For centuries, Buddhist wisdom has held the antidote, a way to see thoughts for what they are, fleeting, insubstantial, like clouds drifting across a vast sky. Not enemies to fight, not puzzles to solve, but passing weather in the mind. Tonight, as you listen, something inside you will begin to shift. The cycle of overthinking will loosen its grip. The endless noise will soften, like background music fading into silence, and you'll feel yourself sinking into a stillness deeper than you've known in years. When you wake tomorrow, the world will feel lighter. Not because every question has been answered, but because you'll finally understand that not every question needs an answer. You'll step into a freedom beyond analysis, beyond worry, beyond the endless what-ifs. This isn't just another audio to help you drift off. This is your doorway out of overthinking, into peace, clarity, and rest. Are you ready? Let's begin. And so, from here, we take our first step into Buddhist wisdom by looking closely at a teaching that speaks directly to the way the mind tortures itself long after the moment of pain has passed. You know that feeling when something hurts, a harsh word from someone you love, a mistake at work, an unexpected setback, and then your mind won't let it go. Hours later, days later, even weeks later, the event plays on repeat, as if your thoughts are stuck like a scratched record. The body felt the pain once, but the mind keeps replaying it again and again until it grows larger than the original wound. This is what the Buddha explained in the story of the two arrows. The first arrow is the pain of life itself. Nobody escapes it. Illness, loss, rejection, and disappointment are all part of being human. They pierce us suddenly, often without warning, and there is no controlling that first strike. But then there is the second arrow. This one is not shot by life, it is shot by us, through our own mind. The second arrow is the thought that says, "Why me? This always happens. I'll never get over this. What if it happens again?" It is the endless replay, the judgment, the self-punishment that grows heavier with every repetition. The wound from the first arrow may heal, but the second arrow keeps stabbing as long as we allow it. When you see this clearly, it becomes obvious why overthinking feels so exhausting. It is not only that you suffer from what happens to you, you suffer from what your mind does after the fact. If someone criticizes you, the sting of their words might last a moment. But if you relive that criticism 10, 20, or 50 times in your head, you are making yourself experience the pain of it over and over. The body cannot tell the difference between what is happening in front of you and what you are replaying in memory. The heart beats faster, the muscles tense, the breath shortens. You end up trapped in a loop that has no mercy. So how do you stop shooting that second arrow? The first step is recognition. Many people are unaware of the moment they pick up the bow. They feel the discomfort of the first arrow and, without noticing, begin a cascade of thoughts about it. The key is to catch yourself right at the start. When a painful thought or memory arises, pause, name it. Say quietly to yourself, "This is the second arrow." By naming it, you create a small space between you and the thought, and in that space, you have a choice. You can either load another arrow, or you can put the bow down. This doesn't mean you have to pretend the first arrow never hit you. Pain is real. Disappointment is real. The Buddha never denied that. What he showed us is that the pain does not need to be multiplied by resistance, judgment, or obsessive replay. By separating the unavoidable hurt from the optional suffering, you give yourself a way out. The moment you see that thoughts are adding layers to the original wound, you have already weakened their grip. Another way to step out of the cycle is through compassion. Think about how harsh the second arrow is. If a friend came to you with a wound, would you stab them again and again while blaming them for being hurt? Of course not. You would comfort them, clean the wound, hold them gently. Yet this is exactly what we do to ourselves with overthinking. We beat ourselves up for being human. Compassion interrupts that pattern. The next time you catch your mind replaying an old mistake, soften your inner voice. Say to yourself, "I am hurting, and that is okay." This simple act is like dropping the bow to the ground. It doesn't erase the pain of the first arrow, but it stops the cycle of shooting more. Overthinking thrives on the belief that if you keep analyzing, you'll find control. But the more you try to control the pain, the deeper it digs in. Here is where mindfulness comes in. To stop overthinking, practice returning to the present moment again and again. When your thoughts drag you back into the scene of hurt, redirect your attention to your breath. Notice the rise and fall of your chest. Feel the ground beneath your feet or the warmth of your blanket. These small anchors remind your body that it is here, now, not back in the past where the hurt took place. Slowly, the power of the memory fades. The second arrow dissolves into air. Another hidden truth in this teaching is that the second arrow often hurts more than the first. Physical pain, rejection, failure, these are intense but usually temporary. The mind, however, can carry the echo for years. Some people keep wounds alive long after the event is over. They replay a childhood insult, a broken relationship, a missed chance, until the second arrow becomes part of their identity. I am not good enough. I am always rejected. I am unlucky. The original hurt may have passed decades ago, but the second arrow keeps the scar raw. Buddhist wisdom shows us that this is unnecessary. The mind is not your enemy, but it must be trained not to turn every bruise into a lifelong wound. Training the mind requires patience. At first, you will notice the second arrow only after it has already struck. You will wake up at 3 in the morning realizing you've been thinking for hours about something that happened years ago. That is normal. Do not punish yourself for noticing late. Each time you recognize the pattern, you weaken it. Over time, the gap between the first arrow and your reaction will grow. One day, you may even notice the thought rising and let it pass without holding it. That is freedom, the freedom of not stabbing yourself again and again. There is also wisdom in understanding that no one can avoid the first arrow. Life brings pain. Trying to resist that truth only makes the second arrow sharper. But if you accept that pain is part of the human journey, you stop being shocked by it. When it arrives, you allow it to be there without fighting. This acceptance doesn't mean you enjoy pain. It means you stop giving it extra power by pretending it shouldn't exist. With acceptance, the first arrow is enough. No second arrow is needed. A practical exercise you can try is journaling. At the end of the day, write down the moments that hurt you. Next to each one, ask yourself, was this the first arrow or the second? Did the pain come from the event itself or from my thoughts about it afterward? Often you will see that the event was small, but your mind inflated it into something unbearable. Writing it down makes this visible, and once it is visible, it begins to lose its control. Even deeper, the teaching of the two arrows reveals something about the nature of thought itself. Thoughts are not solid. They appear, linger, and vanish like ripples in water. The second arrow tricks you into believing that your thoughts are permanent, that they define who you are. But once you see them for what they are, temporary mental events, you realize they have no lasting power unless you give it to them. In this way, every time you let go of the second arrow, you train yourself to see thoughts as passing phenomena rather than absolute truths. This insight changes everything. It turns your relationship with your own mind upside down. Instead of being a prisoner to every replay, every judgment, every regret, you become the witness. You watch thoughts rise and fall without clinging. Overthinking loses its grip because it feeds on identification, on the belief that this thought is me. When that illusion drops, the arrows drop with it. The parable of the two arrows isn't just a story, it is a mirror. It reflects the way we live every day, punishing ourselves for what has already passed. But once you see the reflection clearly, you can step out of it. You can choose not to load the bow. And when you do, you discover a kind of peace that has nothing to do with avoiding pain and everything to do with refusing to multiply it. As you rest tonight, let this teaching sink into your heart. Notice when your mind tries to fire again and remind yourself gently, this is the second arrow. I do not need to shoot it. I can let it fall. Each time you do this, you reclaim a piece of your freedom. Each time you step closer to a mind that no longer attacks itself in the dark. And this is only the beginning. The two arrows teach us that much of our suffering is optional, created by the way we relate to our thoughts. But what if we went even deeper, beyond the arrows, into the very nature of thought itself? What if overthinking could be seen not as a flaw to fix, but as a pattern of illusions passing through the sky of awareness? That is where we go next. The teaching of the two arrows shows us that pain is often doubled by the way the mind replays and resists it. But that insight opens a deeper door. If thoughts have the power to add so much suffering, then what are they really made of? Why do they feel so heavy, so convincing, when in truth they cannot even be touched, held, or weighed? This question leads directly into the next layer of Buddhist wisdom, the emptiness of thought. A thought arrives quickly. One moment your mind is still, the next moment a word, a memory, or a fear flashes across your awareness. It feels solid, urgent, sometimes overwhelming. You may find yourself believing it as if it were a fact written in stone. Yet, if you look closely, what is it? A flicker of electricity in the brain, a passing image, a soundless sentence that forms inside you and dissolves almost as fast as it appeared. The strength of a thought comes not from its reality, but from your relationship to it. When you treat it as unquestionable truth, it becomes a chain. When you see it as temporary, it becomes light as air. This is what is meant by the emptiness of thought. Not that thoughts do not exist, but that they lack the solidity we project onto them. They are phenomena, appearances without substance. To recognize this is to free yourself from overthinking, because you stop mistaking mental weather for the climate of your entire life. Think of how many times a thought has come to you with intensity. I will fail. They don't like me. This will never get better. And later you realized it wasn't true. Yet, in the moment, the thought carried the weight of reality itself. This is the trap. The mind does not announce, "Here is a temporary thought passing through." It declares, "This is how it is." Without awareness, you bow to that declaration. With awareness, you see it as a performance with no real actor behind it. Buddhist practice trains you to watch thoughts the way you might watch clouds moving across the sky. Some are large, dark, and heavy. Some are small and soft. Some vanish almost before they are noticed. None of them ever alter the sky itself. The sky remains open, vast, and untouched, no matter how many clouds pass through it. In the same way, your awareness, the part of you that notices thoughts, remains untouched by them. The more you rest in that awareness, the less control thoughts have over your mood, your choices, and your sleep. There is great freedom in learning not to fuse yourself with every thought that arises. The sentence in your head that says, "I am not enough," is not you. It is not truth. It is a soundless whisper shaped by old habits, old experiences, old conditioning. When you see it as just that, it passes through like a bird crossing the sky. It leaves no permanent mark. Overthinking loses its fuel when you stop believing every thought deserves attention. The mind's tendency is to grab thoughts, examine them, polish them, and stack them into towers of interpretation. That is how a single event becomes hours of rumination. But when you recognize the emptiness of thought, the tower collapses because its bricks were never solid to begin with. What remains is open space, and in that space you can breathe again. One helpful practice is labeling. As a thought arises, instead of diving into it, give it a simple label. Worry, memory, fear, planning. By doing this, you no longer treat it as fact. You see it as a category, a passing mental event. The content of the thought becomes less important than its nature. It is just a thought. This labeling shifts your relationship from identification to observation. You are not inside the storm, you are watching the weather report. Another key insight is that thoughts cannot sustain themselves without your attention. Like a fire that dies when you stop feeding it wood, a thought dissolves when you stop fueling it with interest. Notice the next time a worry enters your mind. If you pour attention into it, it grows, branches, multiplies. If you acknowledge it lightly and let your focus return to the breath or the sensations of your body, it fades. The emptiness of thought is revealed in this fading. It shows you that no thought has inherent power. Its power comes from your grip on it. This recognition also reshapes how you relate to anxiety. Anxiety thrives on the belief that what the mind says is dangerous must be prepared for. But when you see thoughts as passing phenomena, you no longer need to prepare for every story the mind creates. You can meet anxiety with a simple response. This too is only a thought. That small sentence cuts through the illusion of solidity and brings relief. It is also worth noticing how thoughts arise on their own. You do not sit down and decide, "I will think of fear right now." The mind produces them spontaneously, like waves forming in the ocean. If you did not create them deliberately, why treat them as ultimate truth? This perspective softens the compulsion to take ownership of every passing mental event. Thoughts happen. Awareness notices. You are not required to build a world out of them. Some traditions describe thoughts as echoes. They are not reality itself, but reverberations of past experiences, beliefs, and conditioning. You might hear the echo of a parent's criticism in your own inner voice decades later and mistake it for truth. But an echo has no source of its own. Once you see this, the grip weakens. You understand that a thought's power is borrowed, not inherent. This understanding does not mean you must reject thinking altogether. Thoughts are tools. They help you plan, create, and remember. But overthinking happens when the tool is mistaken for the master, when the passing clouds are mistaken for the sky itself. By seeing thoughts as empty of solidity, you return them to their proper role: servants, not rulers. Another practice that reveals the emptiness of thought is focusing on the spaces between them. Sit quietly and notice the gap after one thought ends and before another begins. For many, this gap is overlooked because the mind quickly fills it. But if you rest in that space, even for a few seconds, you discover something profound. Peace is already there. The mind may tell you that you must solve everything to rest, but the silence between thoughts shows you otherwise. This gap is always available, no matter what clouds pass overhead. The emptiness of thought also helps with letting go of identity stories. Overthinking often revolves around narratives about who you are. I am a failure. I am always unlucky. I am too anxious. These identities feel carved into stone, but when you look closely, they are built from nothing more than repeating thoughts. If thoughts are empty, then these identities are empty too. They have no permanent foundation. Recognizing this allows you to live more freely, no longer chained by labels that never truly defined you. This practice is not about suppressing thought. Suppression only makes thoughts return stronger. Instead, it is about recognition without attachment. When a thought arises, let it be seen, let it be named, let it pass. Do not fight, do not cling. This attitude is what Buddhists call non-clinging awareness. It transforms the way you live with your mind. Consider how this changes daily life. A thought arises: I cannot handle this meeting tomorrow. Before, you might spiral into hours of anxiety. With the understanding of emptiness, you note, that is worry. You return to your breath. The thought dissolves. Later, another arises. What if I said the wrong thing to my friend? You note, that is memory. It passes. Each time, you reinforce the habit of releasing instead of grasping. Over weeks and months, this changes the entire atmosphere of your mind. The teaching also points toward compassion for others. When you see that your thoughts are empty, you also realize that other people's thoughts are empty too. Their judgments, their opinions, their criticisms are not solid truths. They are passing clouds in their own minds. This makes it easier to forgive, to let go of resentment, and to stop being wounded by every word. You stop shooting yourself with their arrows because you see that even their arrows are made of mist. In modern times, science echoes this wisdom. Neuroscience shows that thoughts are patterns of neural firing, temporary connections that shift constantly. Psychology shows that beliefs and self-talk are conditioned by environment and can be rewired. The Buddha's teaching of emptiness aligns with this. Thoughts feel real, but they are not permanent structures. They can be reshaped, released, and allowed to fade. The real gift of seeing thoughts as empty is rest. Without this understanding, the mind feels like a battlefield full of enemies to defeat. With it, the mind becomes a sky through which clouds drift. There is no need to fight them. You simply watch, and the watching itself is freedom. Overthinking cannot survive in this spaciousness. As you lie down tonight, notice the thoughts that arise. Instead of clinging to them or pushing them away, see them as clouds passing through the sky of awareness. They form, they dissolve, they leave no trace. This recognition turns the restless mind into a gentle breeze. Sleep comes not by silencing thoughts, but by seeing their true nature, empty, fleeting, powerless without your grip. When thoughts are seen as clouds without weight, when they are recognized as passing events rather than permanent truths, another question naturally arises. If they are empty, why do we continue speaking to them, arguing with them, and answering back as if they were voices in a room? The mind creates entire conversations with itself, endless debates, explanations, rehearsals, justifications. This is the internal noise that drains energy and keeps rest out of reach. And here, Buddhist wisdom offers something rare and powerful: noble silence. Noble silence is not simply the absence of words. It is not just keeping the mouth closed. It is a turning away from the compulsion to respond to every whisper inside. It is the courage to remain still while thoughts try to bait you into dialogue. Silence in this sense is active, alive, and deeply healing. To practice noble silence is to discover that you do not have to attend every argument your mind invites you to. You do not have to explain yourself to your own thoughts. You can allow them to pass unanswered, like strangers walking by on the street. This silence cuts at the root of overthinking, because overthinking is built on response. A thought arises and the mind reacts. Yes, that's true. No, that's not fair. What about next time? Each reaction builds another layer of dialogue. Soon, you are trapped in a courtroom in your own head, with the prosecutor, the defense, and the judge, all played by you. Noble silence ends the trial. It leaves the courtroom empty. The case against you dissolves because there is no one left to argue with. There is strength in realizing that thoughts only demand response when you believe they have authority. A worry says, something bad will happen. You rush to calm it, to make plans, to reason with it. A judgment says, you failed. You fight back, listing evidence, defending yourself. But the worry is not an oracle, and the judgment is not a verdict. They are sentences in the air. When you practice silence, you refuse to legitimize them with replies. They wither without your participation. This silence is not cold or indifferent. It is a silence rooted in awareness, a silence that listens but does not cling. You hear the thought, you allow it, but you do not fuel it. In daily life, this may look like sitting quietly as your mind shouts possibilities and simply breathing without choosing sides. At first, the thoughts may grow louder, desperate for attention, like children tugging at your sleeve. But over time, when they realize no answer will come, they lose their force. The noise weakens, and in its place comes a stillness you may have never known. The Buddha himself often taught not only through words, but through silence. There were times when disciples asked him questions designed not to seek truth, but to trap him in debate. In those moments, he would remain silent. That silence was not ignorance, it was wisdom. He knew that responding would only feed the fire of endless speculation. By remaining silent, he showed that not all noise deserves a reply. This principle applies directly to the dialogues inside your own head. In the modern world, where everything demands reaction, messages, notifications, opinions, the practice of noble silence is revolutionary. It tells you that you do not owe every thought a reply. It gives you permission to rest even while your mind is busy. The internal noise may continue for a while, but without your answers, it becomes background hum rather than a storm. And eventually, silence deepens until the noise fades completely. There is a form of meditation used to cultivate this practice, sitting quietly and watching the flow of thoughts without engaging. A thought appears. I forgot to call them. Instead of replying, yes, I'll do it tomorrow, you remain silent. The thought floats by and disappears. Another arises. I am not good enough. You do not argue, you do not resist, you stay silent. Soon you notice that silence has a weight, a presence. It is not empty in the negative sense. It is full of peace. This silence is also powerful at night. Lying in bed, thoughts race. You answer them, and they multiply. But if you remain silent, if you allow them to exist without response, they lose the momentum to keep you awake. The nervous system relaxes because the courtroom of the mind has finally closed. The silence becomes a cradle that holds you until sleep arrives naturally. Noble silence is also a way to reclaim dignity from the noise of self-criticism. Thoughts may hurl insults. You are worthless. You always fail. The usual reflex is to protest, to defend, or to collapse under the weight of those words. But silence refuses to participate. Silence stands tall and unmoved, knowing that the insults are only echoes of old conditioning. Silence is not weakness. It is refusing to lower yourself into battle with shadows. Another dimension of this practice is restraint in speech with others. When the mind is restless, it often spills its chaos into words, filling conversations with complaints, defenses, and justifications. Practicing noble silence externally mirrors the inner practice. By holding back unnecessary speech, you strengthen the ability to hold back unnecessary internal dialogue. This outer discipline feeds the inner one, and together they bring calm. Overthinking often begins with the belief that every thought is urgent. Silence exposes the illusion. A thought comes, you do not answer, and nothing collapses. The world continues. You realize most of what the mind presents is not urgent at all. This realization is liberating. It frees you from being a servant to every impulse of thought. Noble silence also sharpens perception. When the noise quiets, what remains is clarity. You begin to notice details that were buried under chatter: the sound of your breath, the feel of your heartbeat, the subtle moods of the body. You also notice emotions more clearly because they are not drowned in commentary. Fear, sadness, or joy can be felt directly without being tangled in words. This directness brings honesty and simplicity into your life. There is also compassion hidden in silence. When you do not argue with your mind, you are treating yourself gently. You are no longer the accuser and the accused in an endless trial. You are simply presence itself, allowing thoughts to rise and fall. This kindness transforms your relationship with yourself. Instead of being an opponent in constant debate, you become a friend who offers quiet support. Over time, this practice reshapes the entire landscape of the mind. The habit of answering thoughts weakens. The reflex to debate fades. Silence becomes the default, not the exception. And in that silence, rest becomes possible. Overthinking no longer has fertile ground because it depends on reaction. Without your replies, the cycle breaks. Practical ways to deepen noble silence include setting aside moments in the day where you choose not to respond internally. While walking, let thoughts arise and fall without comment. While drinking tea, keep attention on taste and warmth, refusing to follow thought threads. At night, before sleep, rest in the silence of breath. Each practice is a rehearsal that strengthens the capacity to remain silent when noise surges. The power of noble silence is that it reveals you are not your thoughts, and you are not required to converse with them. They can shout, whisper, accuse, or predict, and you can remain still. This stillness is stronger than any argument. It dismantles compulsive dialogue not by force, but by refusal to participate. And from this refusal comes a peace that grows deeper with every silent breath. When silence becomes a way of meeting the mind, a new clarity opens. Thoughts no longer dominate simply because they appear, and you are not compelled to answer their noise. Yet even in silence, thoughts can still feel heavy, as if they carry permanence. The mind tells you, this fear will always be here, this sadness will never leave, this problem will follow you forever. It is this illusion of permanence that binds you most tightly. To loosen that grip, Buddhist wisdom turns to one of its most central truths: impermanence. Everything changes. The seasons turn, the body grows and ages, rivers flow, clouds disperse. Every breath is different from the one before. Nothing in life stays still for long, not even the most overwhelming emotions or the sharpest thoughts. But overthinking thrives on forgetting this truth. Anxiety convinces you that a worry is fixed, that it will return endlessly, that it defines you. By remembering impermanence, the weight of these thoughts dissolves because you see them for what they are: temporary ripples in the current of experience. A thought that felt unbearable last year may not even be remembered now. A problem that once consumed your mind may already be solved, forgotten, or revealed as less important than you believed. This shows that thoughts, no matter how convincing, are not permanent structures. They rise, they pass, and they make space for new states of mind. Recognizing impermanence directly undercuts the belief that your current inner state is eternal. When you see that nothing lasts, you stop feeding the illusion that this moment of fear or this cycle of overthinking will trap you forever. Overthinking resists impermanence because it craves certainty. It tries to freeze reality into fixed answers. This is who I am. This is what will happen. This is what went wrong. But reality refuses to be frozen. Situations evolve, people change, feelings shift, and even memories alter with time. The mind that clings to permanence fights against the very nature of existence. This struggle is exhausting, and it is the soil in which overthinking grows. By letting impermanence sink in, the struggle eases. You no longer demand from life what it cannot give, guarantees. One way to explore impermanence is through direct observation of the body. Sit quietly and notice the breath. Each inhale arises, fills, and then disappears. No breath can be held forever. Notice sensations. Warmth comes, then fades. Tension appears, then shifts. Even pain moves and transforms when observed carefully. These are not abstract lessons, but lived evidence that change is the only constant. Once you see this in the body, it becomes easier to trust that anxious thoughts too will rise and fall. Impermanence also reframes suffering. When grief or fear feels unbearable, it is often because you unconsciously believe it will remain unchanged. But by recalling that all experiences pass, you create space around the pain. You may still feel sorrow, but it is no longer endless. You may still face fear, but it is no longer absolute. Each feeling becomes one moment in a stream, not a prison that defines your future. This shift allows rest, because the mind no longer clings as tightly to every passing state. Daily life offers countless lessons in impermanence if you choose to notice them. A flower blooms, then withers. A meal is cooked, eaten, and gone. A conversation begins and ends. Each detail of existence whispers the same truth. Nothing stays. Overthinking thrives by pretending that thoughts are exceptions to this law, but they are not. The thought that feels so real today will be gone tomorrow, replaced by another. To hold on to it as if it were eternal is to resist the natural flow of life. Seeing impermanence also changes how you view identity. Overthinking often attaches to rigid self-definitions. I am always anxious. I am someone who fails. I am never good enough. But if you look closely, the self is also impermanent. Who you were 10 years ago is not who you are today. Even in a single day, your moods, thoughts, and roles shift constantly. By embracing impermanence, you loosen the grip of these self-judgments. If everything changes, then no negative story about yourself can be final. This wisdom does not mean denying pain or pretending everything is fleeting in a way that makes it unimportant. It means holding every experience lightly, knowing it will not stay the same. This gentle awareness removes the desperation that fuels overthinking. Instead of clinging to a solution that will last forever, you work with the present moment, trusting that change will carry you forward. Impermanence also brings gratitude. When you realize that nothing lasts, every small joy becomes more precious. The laugh of a loved one, the warmth of sunlight, the quiet of night, all are temporary. Overthinking blinds you to these moments by dragging you into the past or future. But impermanence wakes you up to the value of what is here now before it changes. Gratitude itself is an antidote to worry. because it roots you in appreciation rather than analysis. Another powerful practice is reflecting on how even the hardest storms of your past eventually ended. Think back to a time you thought you could not bear. Did it stay forever? Or did life move, carrying you with it, until the intensity softened? This memory is not meant to glorify struggle, but to remind you that permanence was never real. By remembering this truth, you weaken the habit of believing that current fears will last without end. Impermanence also helps with decision-making. Overthinking often arises when you try to predict every outcome and secure a path without risk. But impermanence shows that outcomes themselves will change. The decision you make today will not define you forever, because circumstances shift and you adapt. This frees you to act without being paralyzed by the need for perfect certainty. Life itself is flexible, and so are you. The teaching of impermanence even applies to thought patterns themselves. Habits of worry may feel ingrained, but they too are subject to change. With practice, awareness, and patience, new patterns replace old ones. Just as water wears down stone over time, gentle reminders of impermanence reshape the pathways of the mind. This truth gives hope. Overthinking is not fixed. It too will pass, especially when seen clearly. When applied deeply, impermanence dissolves fear of the future. Fear thrives on the belief that the worst outcome will last forever. But in reality, even difficulties change form. Even suffering shifts. By knowing this, you can meet the future not with panic, but with trust in the ever-changing flow of life. This trust is not blind optimism. It is grounded in direct observation of reality as it is. As you rest at night, you can practice impermanence in a simple way. Notice each thought that arises. Watch it arrive, linger, and fade. Remind yourself, this too will pass. When worry tells you it is permanent, answer with the truth of impermanence. You are not forcing thoughts away, you are letting their own nature reveal itself. With time, this practice weakens the illusion of permanence so deeply that anxious thoughts lose their grip before they even settle. Impermanence is not something to fear, though the mind often resists it. It is the reason beauty exists, the reason growth is possible, the reason suffering does not last. To embrace it is to step out of the prison of overthinking and into the living stream of reality. Thoughts arise, they pass. Feelings rise, they pass. Life moves, always renewing itself. When this truth is lived, the mind no longer clings to fear as if it were eternal. It relaxes, rests, and opens to the quiet rhythm of change. When the truth of impermanence is seen clearly, anxious thoughts begin to lose their grip because you no longer believe they will last forever. Yet even with this understanding, the mind often creates spirals so strong that you feel pulled along without choice. A single worry can turn into a storm of thoughts, each feeding the next, until the original concern is buried under layers of mental construction. To understand how this happens, Buddhist teaching points to dependent origination, the principle that everything arises because of conditions. Nothing stands alone, not even your thoughts. Overthinking is not random. It unfolds link by link, each mental event giving rise to another, until you are caught in a chain that feels unbreakable. The spiral often begins with contact. Something is seen, heard, remembered, or felt in the body. From that contact, a spark of feeling arises, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. The unpleasant feeling, however brief, is often the seed. From that seed, craving begins, the craving to get rid of the discomfort, to fix it, to solve it, to find certainty. Craving leads to clinging, the mind attaching itself to the thought as if it were urgent. From clinging comes becoming, the thought taking form as a narrative. This is who I am. This will always happen. This is what I must prevent. That narrative hardens into identity, into a sense of self trapped in a problem. And so the wheel of overthinking spins, not because the original contact was unbearable, but because each link created the conditions for the next. When you begin to see this process step by step, the spiral loses its mystery. You realize that overthinking is not one giant force, but many small movements connected together. Each link depends on the one before it, and because it is dependent, it can also be interrupted. You cannot stop contact itself. You will always see, hear, remember, and feel, but you can bring awareness at the moment feeling arises. If you notice the unpleasant sensation and allow it to exist without craving, the next links weaken. If you let craving arise but do not cling, the chain breaks further down. Awareness at any point is enough to disrupt the momentum. Consider a simple example. You receive a short message from a friend that feels cold. The contact is the sight of the words. The feeling is discomfort in the chest, maybe a sting of rejection. Craving arises. I want to know why they said that. I want to feel safe again. Clinging follows. You replay the message, analyze tone, create interpretations. Becoming takes shape. They are upset with me. I did something wrong. Identity solidifies. I am the kind of person who ruins relationships. Within minutes, a few words on a screen have spiraled into a storm of self-judgment, but at each step, the process could have been softened. If, at the stage of feeling you had noticed, this is discomfort and discomfort passes, the spiral would not have gained strength. Dependent origination teaches that suffering is constructed, not delivered fully formed. Overthinking is not poured onto you by force. It is built moment by moment. This is empowering because it shows that freedom does not require controlling the first spark. You only need awareness at one link to loosen the chain. Each moment of recognition is like removing a link from a circle of metal. Once the circle is broken, it can no longer bind you. To work with this practically, begin by tracing spirals backward. The next time you notice you are lost in overthinking, pause and ask, what was the link before this? Was it a craving for certainty? Was it an unpleasant feeling? Was it contact with a memory? By tracing back, you reveal the architecture of your spiral. Once you see the structure, you can meet it earlier next time. Over weeks and months, you begin to intercept spirals sooner, until eventually you recognize the first spark and allow it to pass without building chains upon it. Another way to explore this is through meditation on feeling tones. Every moment carries a subtle flavor, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. By paying attention to these tones, you train yourself to catch the exact moment when craving is likely to arise. For example, when an unpleasant tone appears, you can simply note unpleasant without resisting. This gentle acknowledgement prevents craving from escalating into clinging. It is like noticing a match before it becomes a fire. The teaching also points to the illusion of self embedded in overthinking. When the links solidify into identity, the thought, "I am anxious," feels heavier than anxiety is present. But identity is simply another product of dependent origination, arising because of conditions. If you see it as constructed, you stop mistaking it for essence. This loosens the hold of self-judgment and opens space for compassion. You are not the chain itself. You are the awareness that can watch its links appear and disappear. Dependent origination also explains why overthinking often feels endless. Because one thought conditions the next, the chain can loop without end, feeding itself like a wheel turning on its own momentum. But the wheel is not self-powered. It depends on conditions, and conditions can be changed. Bringing awareness to breathing, shifting attention to the body, or practicing kindness are all ways of altering the conditions so the chain cannot keep spinning. You do not need to destroy the wheel, you only need to stop pushing it. This teaching also reframes blame. Many people attack themselves for overthinking, believing it is a flaw of character. But dependent origination shows that overthinking arises from causes and conditions. It is not personal failure, it is a process. Just as fire arises when fuel, oxygen, and heat meet, spirals arise when contact, feeling, craving, and clinging align. This understanding brings gentleness. Instead of condemning yourself, you work with the conditions. Remove the fuel, and the fire fades. A helpful exercise is to map a spiral in writing. Start with the final state, perhaps hours of worry, and then trace back. What thought came just before? What craving drove it? What feeling sparked it? What contact began it? Writing this chain reveals that what felt like one overwhelming block is actually many small steps, and each small step can be met differently. Over time, this mapping builds the skill of seeing the links in real time. Dependent origination also shows why mindfulness must be continuous. If awareness fades, the chain rebuilds itself quickly. A moment of contact can slip into craving before you notice. But if mindfulness is steady, the links have no room to harden. Continuous awareness is like keeping a light on in a dark room. With the light on, the shadows of spirals cannot trick you. This teaching goes beyond thought alone. Even emotions, moods, and habits arise from dependent conditions. Overthinking is often tangled with bodily states, fatigue, hunger, tension. By addressing these conditions with care, the mental links weaken naturally. A tired mind clings faster than a rested one. Caring for the body is also part of breaking the chain. Understanding dependent origination turns overthinking from an enemy into a teacher. Each spiral shows you its own construction. Each worry that grows too loud reveals the links that built it. The more you study them, the less convincing they appear. Eventually, the habit of spiraling loses its foundation because you see through the illusion that it is inevitable. And when the chain no longer binds you, the mind tastes a kind of space that feels completely new. Thoughts may still arise, but they do not gather into spirals. Feelings may still come, but they do not harden into identity. Overthinking loses its engine, and in its place grows a steady clarity that does not depend on silencing thought, but on knowing how thought arises and passes away. When the chain of overthinking is seen clearly, it becomes obvious that the mind is constantly moving between two extremes. On one side is the desperate attempt to control thoughts, to silence them, to push them down by force. On the other is the helpless surrender to them, letting them dictate every mood, every choice, every hour of the night. Both extremes create suffering. Suppression makes thoughts rebound stronger, and indulgence leaves you drowning in their flood. The Buddha pointed to a way beyond these extremes, a middle way, steady and balanced, where thoughts neither dominate nor are denied, where peace is found in walking between control and chaos. This middle way is not passive resignation. It is not giving up. It is also not harsh discipline that squeezes the mind into silence. It is a path of balance where thoughts are allowed to exist, but not to govern. You do not need to banish them, nor do you need to obey them. They are given room to pass without being chained or resisted. This balance is subtle but transformative, because it frees you from the exhausting battle of either fighting thoughts or being consumed by them. Overthinking thrives in extremes. When you try to control every thought, the mind resists. Suppression is like pressing a ball under water. The harder you push, the stronger it rebounds. This is why telling yourself, "Stop worrying, stop thinking," rarely works. The command itself becomes another thought, another layer of resistance. The mind does not grow quieter under pressure. It grows louder. On the other extreme, when you give thoughts full authority, they spiral unchecked. You replay the past, rehearse the future, and mistake every inner voice for truth. This indulgence makes the mind restless, like a fire fed with endless fuel. The middle way cuts through both traps. Instead of pushing thoughts down or letting them carry you away, you allow them to appear and fade naturally. You acknowledge their presence without adding control or surrender. The practice is like walking a narrow bridge. Leaning too far one way is suppression. Leaning too far the other is indulgence. But staying balanced brings stability. This balance is not rigid. It adapts to each moment. Sometimes it means stepping back from over-engagement. Sometimes it means gently guiding attention, but it always avoids extremes. One way to cultivate this is through mindful observation. As a thought arises, note it clearly. This is worry. This is planning. This is judgment. By naming it, you neither fight nor feed it. You recognize it without attachment. This simple act keeps you in the middle way because you are aware without being entangled. The thought is acknowledged but not amplified. Another practice is to anchor awareness in the body. When thoughts grow intense, bring attention to the breath, the weight of the body against the floor, the sensation of the hands resting. This is not suppression, because you are not forcing thoughts away. It is redirection, choosing not to let the spiral dominate. The thoughts remain in the background, but your focus rests in something steady. This middle ground prevents both drowning in thought and exhausting yourself by trying to banish it. The middle way also reframes the idea of control itself. True control is not forcing thoughts into silence. It is guiding your relationship with them. You cannot stop the waves from rising in the ocean of the mind, but you can learn to surf them rather than be thrown under or try to freeze the water still. Control in this sense is gentle steering, not domination. It is the wisdom of knowing when to let go when to redirect, and when to rest in stillness. In daily life, this balance shows up in small ways. You may notice yourself worrying about an upcoming event. Suppression would say, "I must not think about this," which only makes it louder. Indulgence would let the worry spin endlessly. The middle way acknowledges, "Worry is here." Then it turns attention back to the task at hand, not denying the thought, but not granting it full control. This shift breaks the cycle without creating inner conflict. The middle way also protects you from self-criticism. Many people attack themselves for having thoughts at all, believing peace means an empty mind. But thoughts are natural. To expect absolute silence is to set yourself up for failure. The middle way accepts that thoughts will come, and peace comes not from erasing them, but from relating differently to them. This acceptance itself reduces the energy of overthinking, because judgment no longer fuels the cycle. Even in meditation, the middle way is vital. Beginners often struggle because they think meditation means eliminating thought. When thoughts arise, they feel failure. But meditation in the middle way is not about elimination. It is about awareness without reaction. Each time the mind drifts, you gently bring it back. No harshness, no indulgence. This patience trains the nervous system to find calm without force. There is also wisdom in recognizing that the middle way requires practice, not perfection. At times, you will slip into suppression, tightening against thoughts. At other times, you will slip into indulgence, following them for hours. But each time you notice and return to balance, you strengthen the habit. The middle way is not about never falling. It is about learning how to return to balance again and again. The middle way also speaks to how we live in the world. Just as we balance internally, we must balance externally. Some respond to life's difficulties by trying to control everything, micromanaging every outcome. Others give up entirely, letting circumstances drag them without resistance. Both lead to suffering. The middle way teaches resilience. Act where you can, release where you cannot, and remain steady in the flow between. This same wisdom applies to the inner world of thought. To deepen this practice, reflect on the nature of extremes. Ask yourself, when I try to control thoughts, do I find peace or tension? When I surrender to them, do I find freedom or exhaustion? Then ask, what happens when I allow them? Acknowledge them and gently redirect. This reflection makes the truth of the middle way undeniable. The body feels lighter, the mind more spacious, the heart more at ease. Overthinking cannot survive balance. It thrives on the friction of resistance and the fuel of indulgence. Without either, it loses its engine. By resting in the middle way, thoughts still come, but they no longer bind you. They are seen, allowed, and released, leaving awareness open and calm. This is not escape, but wisdom, walking the narrow path where peace is found, not at the extremes, but in the steady center that holds everything without clinging. Balance between control and chaos teaches you that freedom is not found in forcing silence nor in surrendering completely, but in walking the steady center where thoughts no longer dominate. Yet even when balance is discovered, another trap remains. The mind clings to old patterns, rehearsing the same worries in the same way. Thoughts loop because they approach problems from a rigid perspective, as if the mind already knows everything about what could go wrong. To loosen this rigidity, Zen points to a radical attitude, beginner's mind, or shoshin. Beginner's mind is the state of openness you feel when encountering something new, before assumptions and judgments harden. It is curiosity untainted by past conclusions. Daily worries lose their power when met with this kind of freshness, because the mind can no longer rely on its usual scripts. Instead of repeating old interpretations, it sees each moment as new, each thought as uncharted. This disrupts the repetitive cycles of overthinking and replaces them with space, playfulness, and discovery. Overthinking often comes from a false sense of expertise. The mind believes it has already seen the situation, knows what will happen, and must prepare for every possibility. "I know how this ends," it says, and so it runs old stories on repeat. But those stories are not reality. They are echoes of the past, projected onto the present. Beginner's mind dismantles this illusion. It reminds you that no moment has ever happened before. Even if circumstances look familiar, the details are new, the possibilities are fresh, and your response can be different. This mindset also transforms how you meet uncertainty. Worry thrives on fearing the unknown, but beginner's mind turns the unknown into a field of curiosity. Instead of, "What if everything goes wrong?" the question shifts to, "What is this moment really like?" This change is subtle but profound. Worry feeds on prediction, while beginner's mind feeds on observation. When you are busy noticing what is here, the loop of predicting what might happen loses strength. Practical ways of cultivating beginner's mind start with small details. In daily life, pay attention to ordinary activities as if you were encountering them for the first time. Drinking water, feel its coolness fully. Walking, notice the pressure of each step. Listening, hear tones and pauses freshly without labeling them. This practice trains the brain to drop assumptions and enter direct experience. When worry arises, the same skill applies. Instead of repeating old judgments, look at the thought itself as if you had never seen such a thing before. How does it move? What shape does it take? How does it fade? This curiosity breaks the cycle of automatic reaction. Beginner's mind also softens self-criticism. Overthinking often begins with the assumption, "I already know myself. I am always this way." Beginner's mind refuses such final labels. It asks, "What is present now?" rather than, "What have I always been?" This openness creates room for growth because you no longer chain yourself to past conclusions. Each moment becomes an opportunity to meet yourself anew without the weight of identity stories. Even relationships are renewed through this lens. Worry about what others think is fueled by assumptions. They must be judging me. They will react badly. This always happens. Beginner's mind clears these assumptions away. It asks, "What is truly happening here?" When you meet others without the filter of old conclusions, your responses become more authentic. You listen more, you project less, and connections feel lighter. Overthinking about relationships quiets because it has no rigid script to follow. This mindset also dismantles the belief that control is necessary for safety. When the mind assumes it knows what will happen, it tries to manage every detail to prevent imagined outcomes. Beginner's mind steps into the unknown willingly, not recklessly, but with trust that discovery is possible in each moment. This trust dismantles the cycle of rehearsal and review that defines overthinking. Life feels less like a test to be passed and more like a path to be walked with curiosity. Meditation on beginner's mind can be as simple as watching a single breath with full curiosity. Instead of assuming breathing is familiar, you notice the subtle coolness of the inhale, the warmth of the exhale, the pause between. Each breath is different, each worthy of attention. When the mind tries to wander into worry, the practice is to return with curiosity. What is this breath like? This keeps awareness fresh, interrupting the stale patterns of repetitive thought. There is also a playfulness in beginner's mind. Worry is heavy because it treats every possibility as life or death. Beginner's mind treats the moment like an exploration, lightening the atmosphere. This is not denial of difficulty. It is an attitude that makes room for creativity and resilience. When faced with a challenge, instead of repeating old fears, you approach it as if testing something new. What happens if I try this? Such curiosity prevents the spiral from hardening. The concept also transforms how you meet the future. Overthinking projects the future as a replay of the past. Beginner's mind acknowledges that the future has never been lived before. Every tomorrow is uncharted, and assumptions about it are guesses, not truths. This realization weakens the grip of anxious projection, because the unknown is seen not as a threat, but as an unfolding that can be met freshly, step by step. Practicing beginner's mind also reveals the impermanence of thoughts in a new way. When you look at a thought with curiosity, you notice its beginning, middle, and end. Instead of assuming it will define you, you witness its life cycle. Each observation reinforces that thoughts are temporary events, not permanent truths. This fresh seeing prevents them from looping endlessly, because loops depend on the illusion of permanence. In modern life, beginner's mind is especially powerful because information overload makes the brain believe it already knows. Constant exposure to news, opinions, and analysis creates the illusion of certainty. Worry feeds on this, drawing from a library of assumptions. Beginner's mind strips this away, returning to direct experience. It teaches you to look before you judge, to notice before you predict. This slows the spiral of thought and anchors you in clarity. The discipline of beginner's mind is humility. It admits, I do not fully know. Overthinking is arrogant in its certainty. I already know how this ends. But humility opens the door to freedom. By admitting you do not know, you free yourself from the need to replay every possibility. You discover that not knowing is not weakness, but space in which peace can grow. In every repetition of worry, there is an assumption. I must prepare for this. Beginner's mind asks, what is actually happening now? By returning to now, the fuel of overthinking runs out. Curiosity grounds you in reality rather than speculation. Even a simple act like feeling the air on your skin or the sound of distant traffic can shift you out of repetitive loops because they root you in fresh observation. Over time, this practice reshapes the nervous system. The habit of rushing into loops weakens, replaced by the habit of pausing and looking anew. Each time you drop assumptions, you carve new pathways in the brain. Life becomes less of a replay of old worries and more of a living exploration. This shift does not mean worry never arises, but when it does, it no longer drags you into endless repetition. It meets the openness of beginner's mind and dissolves into it. Approaching life with beginner's mind breaks the rigid lens of repetition, opening the possibility of seeing each moment fresh and free from assumptions. Yet, even with this openness, you may notice that certain patterns of thought return again and again, almost as if carved into the fabric of your mind. These loops are not random. They are the result of habit, shaped by countless repetitions in the past. Buddhism describes this as karma, not in the mystical sense of fate, but as the imprint of action. Every time you respond to worry in the same way, every time you rehearse the same fear, you deepen a groove in the mind. Overthinking is not fixed. It is learned, and like all habits, it can be unlearned. When you repeat a mental action, you strengthen the pathways that support it. Neuroscience today describes this as neuroplasticity. The brain rewires itself according to repeated use. Ancient teachings called this karma, the simple truth that what you cultivate, you become. If you rehearse fear daily, the mind defaults to fear. If you feed doubt, doubt grows strong. But if you cultivate awareness, compassion, and steadiness, these qualities begin to replace the old patterns. Karma here is not punishment, it is practice. Overthinking often feels uncontrollable because its roots run deep. As children, many of us learn to replay mistakes in order to avoid punishment or to anticipate every possibility to stay safe. These strategies worked once, so the mind kept them. Years later, they appear as automatic habits, endless replay of the past, constant forecasting of the future. But automatic does not mean permanent. They are grooves, not prisons. By creating new grooves through deliberate practice, you weaken the old ones until they fade. The key is repetition in the opposite direction. Just as worry grows strong through rehearsal, peace grows strong through rehearsal. Every time you catch a spiral early and gently return to the present, you carve a new imprint. Each moment of non-clinging awareness is a seed planted. With enough planting, the field of the mind transforms. The habit of overthinking, once dominant, begins to wither as new habits take root. Karma of mental habits also explains why overthinking can feel heavier at certain times. Stress, fatigue, or old triggers provide fertile soil for the grooves of worry to activate. These conditions bring the pattern alive. But the recognition of karma empowers you. You see that the loop is not destiny, but a habit awakened by conditions. Change the conditions, and the pattern weakens. Rest, nourishment, mindfulness, these become not luxuries, but acts of reshaping the karmic field of the mind. Breaking karmic habits requires patience. Just as grooves took years to deepen, they will not vanish overnight. But every choice matters. The mind is always learning. Each time you shift from judgment to compassion, from rumination to presence, you send a message into the system. This is the new path. Slowly, the old grooves erode. This is why practice is described as walking a path. Every step reshapes the road. A helpful practice is mindful substitution. When a repetitive thought arises, instead of feeding it, gently replace it with a more skillful pattern. For example, when self-criticism appears, offer a phrase of kindness. May I be at ease? At first it may feel forced, but with repetition, kindness becomes more familiar than judgment. The karmic imprint changes. This is not about suppressing thought, but about planting new seeds until they naturally grow stronger than the old ones. Awareness of karma also prevents despair. Many people believe, "I am just an overthinker. This is who I am." But identity itself is a habit built on repeated thoughts. If those thoughts can change, then so can the sense of self. Karma is fluid, not fixed. The self you experience is the product of countless past moments, and every present moment is an opportunity to shape a new self. This truth turns hopelessness into possibility. It is also important to notice the small victories. A single moment of catching a spiral early may seem trivial, but karmically it matters. Each interruption of the old habit is like water wearing down stone. Over time, the stone transforms, though no single drop seems powerful. Patience and consistency reveal their strength when you look back and see how far you have traveled. The karmic nature of thought also invites compassion for others. When you see someone trapped in worry or anger, you understand they too are caught in habits formed long ago. Instead of judgment, you meet them with empathy. Their loops are not who they are grooves that can also be reshaped. This understanding reduces conflict and opens the possibility of supporting one another's growth. The Buddha described karma as intention. Every moment of intention plants a seed. Overthinking is simply the harvest of seeds planted unconsciously, watered by repetition. But now, with awareness, you can plant intentionally. You can choose seeds of clarity, patience, and courage. Over time, these grow into new habits that replace the restless ones. The field of your mind becomes more peaceful, not by chance, but by cultivation. Even science confirms this truth. Studies on mindfulness show that regular practice rewires brain regions linked to worry and strengthens those linked to calm. Repetition changes structure. This is karma made visible, the brain itself reshaped by habit. What you practice, you become. This makes practice urgent, because every moment you are rehearsing something, either old worry or new awareness. Another way to work with karmic habits is reflection. At the end of the day, ask, what mental patterns did I rehearse today? Which ones did I interrupt? Which ones did I strengthen? This reflection builds accountability. It shows you clearly what seeds you are planting. With honesty, you can choose differently tomorrow. Karmic imprints also explain why meditation is emphasized. In meditation, you repeatedly notice thought and return to awareness. Each return is a carving of a new groove. Each time you refrain from following the spiral, you weaken its hold. This steady training accumulates. Over time, the habit of awareness becomes stronger than the habit of overthinking. What begins as effort eventually becomes natural. At first, interrupting worry requires constant vigilance. But as new karmic patterns form, awareness becomes instinctive. You catch spirals before they grow. You return to presence quickly. The habit of peace begins to run on its own momentum, just as worry once did. This is the fruit of reshaping karma. The mind no longer defaults to restlessness, but to calm. The teaching of karma is not meant to frighten, but to empower. It reminds you that every thought matters, every response matters, every seed matters. Overthinking was learned through repetition, and freedom is learned the same way. By planting wisely, you do not just escape spirals, you cultivate a mind that naturally rests in clarity and compassion. This is the quiet revolution of karma. Habits once formed unconsciously are now rewritten with intention, and the story of your mind begins to change. When you begin to see that overthinking is not destiny, but a habit shaped by repetition, a new kind of freedom opens. Karma shows that what has been built can be reshaped, that patterns are not prisons, but grooves in the mind that can be softened and redirected. Yet even with this understanding, a subtle attachment remains. The mind does not only repeat thoughts, it clings to them, treating them as possessions, as if each one must be held, examined, and owned. This clinging is what gives thoughts their weight. Without attachment, they would pass like birds across the sky, here for a moment and gone the next. The next step in releasing the grip of overthinking is to practice non-clinging. Non-clinging does not mean rejecting thoughts or pushing them away. It is the art of allowing them to visit without making them permanent residents. A thought arises, you notice it, and instead of grasping it tightly, you let it move on. The mind is often like a host who refuses to let guests leave, insisting on keeping them forever, even when the house grows crowded and restless. Non-clinging is learning to open the door, to welcome guests when they arrive, and to let them depart when their time is done. This practice transforms the experience of thought itself. Overthinking thrives because the mind mistakes every thought for something personal, something to hold on to. This is my fear, my memory, my problem. Ownership gives the thought power. Non-clinging removes ownership. A thought is not yours. It is simply a visitor passing through awareness. It comes from conditions. It lingers. It leaves. When you do not cling, you discover that thoughts have no lasting weight. They appear and vanish on their own. The habit of clinging can be subtle. Even when you know a thought is unhelpful, part of you may hold it as a way of seeking safety, as if replaying it will protect you. But clinging only multiplies suffering. It is like grasping fire, hoping it will keep you warm, when in fact it only burns. Non-clinging means trusting that release is safer than grasping, that letting go brings more stability than holding tightly. A simple way to practice this is through awareness of the hands. When you notice a spiral beginning, gently unclench your hands, even if they were not tightly closed. Let them rest open on your lap. This physical gesture mirrors the mental one. Open, not grasping. Over time, the body and mind learn together that openness is strength, not weakness. Non-clinging also changes your relationship with emotions. Often, thoughts are clung to because they are tied to strong feelings. Anger, sadness, fear, these emotions demand attention, and the mind responds by replaying thoughts to explain or justify them. But when you let the emotion exist without attaching to the story around it, it flows more freely. The feeling may rise intensely, but without clinging to the thoughts that fuel it, the wave passes. This practice also reveals the difference between pain and suffering. Pain arises naturally through life's challenges. Suffering grows when we cling to thoughts about pain, building stories that keep it alive. For example, a disappointment may hurt for a day, but clinging to thoughts of failure or unfairness can make the hurt last for years. Non-clinging breaks this extension. It allows pain to exist without creating endless suffering around it. Another benefit of non-clinging is clarity. When you hold a thought tightly, you cannot see it clearly. It becomes distorted by your grip. But when you release, you can observe it without judgment. You see the thought as just a thought, not as an absolute truth. This perspective makes it easier to respond wisely rather than react impulsively. Non-clinging is not apathy. It does not mean ignoring responsibilities or avoiding decisions. It means meeting each thought, each situation, without unnecessary attachment. You act when action is needed, and then you release the mental chatter that tries to hold on long after the moment has passed. This makes action cleaner, less entangled in endless worry. In meditation, non-clinging is practiced by watching the stream of consciousness. Thoughts arise, and instead of following them into stories, you notice them and let them go. Some teachers suggest picturing thoughts as leaves floating down a river, carried by the current. You do not need to chase them or push them away. You only watch them pass. Over time, this habit seeps into daily life, and you begin to meet worries the same way, as passing leaves, not possessions. Non-clinging also reduces fear of the future. Many anxieties are clung to because the mind believes holding them will prepare you. But holding them only creates exhaustion. By releasing, you discover that readiness comes not from clinging to fear, but from meeting each moment as it arrives. The future cannot be solved in advance. It can only be met freshly. Non-clinging allows this meeting to happen without the baggage of endless rehearsals. There is also joy in non-clinging. When you are no longer weighed down by every thought, lightness returns. The mind becomes more spacious, making room for creativity and wonder. Small moments, sunlight, laughter, a kind word, are felt more fully because they are not buried under layers of clung-to worries. The heart becomes less crowded, more open to life as it unfolds. Breaking the habit of clinging requires practice because the mind is conditioned to grasp. But every act of release is a step toward freedom. Each time you notice a thought and let it pass without holding, you carve a new path. Over time, this path becomes more natural than clinging. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer stick. They visit, they leave, and you remain steady. This practice also extends to positive thoughts. Even pleasant memories or hopes can become traps if clung to too tightly. Non-clinging means allowing even joy to flow, appreciating it fully, but not grasping in fear of losing it. This balance prevents overthinking in both directions, not only about fears, but also about desires. In daily life, practice non-clinging by creating small rituals of release. At the end of the day, write your thoughts on paper and set it aside. Tell yourself, these can rest now. When waking, take a breath and acknowledge that yesterday's thoughts are gone. Today is new. These gestures reinforce the truth that holding is optional, that release is always possible. The deepest freedom of non-clinging is realizing that awareness itself is never bound. Thoughts come and go, but awareness remains untouched. You are not the stream of thoughts, you are the space in which they flow. By practicing non-clinging, you rest more and more in that space. The thoughts continue, but they no longer possess you, because you never needed to possess them in the first place. Letting thoughts come and go without holding them is a profound release. Non-clinging shows you that you do not have to host every mental visitor forever, that the mind can remain open without being crowded. But once this freedom is glimpsed, another question rises. How should your energy be directed? If you do not cling, where does the mind's effort go? Too much force leads to strain, while too little allows old habits of rumination to return unchecked. The Buddha pointed directly to this balance through the teaching of right effort, guiding energy in a way that sustains clarity without exhaustion. Right effort begins with understanding that the mind is always moving, always applying energy somewhere. Even doing nothing can be an act of effort if it feeds restlessness or indulgence. Overthinking itself is a form of misdirected energy. Attention pulled again and again into the same grooves, fueling stories that never resolve. The purpose of right effort is not to eliminate effort, but to channel it wisely, to place energy where it nourishes peace rather than perpetuating agitation. This effort is gentle, like guiding water through a channel rather than damming it up or letting it flood uncontrolled. It is steady but not harsh. You learn to recognize 4 key movements: preventing unwholesome states before they arise, abandoning those that have already appeared, cultivating wholesome states that are not yet present, and sustaining wholesome states that have begun. Each of these requires discernment, not force. Preventing unwholesome states means noticing the conditions that give rise to rumination before the spiral begins. Fatigue, stress, and overstimulation often set the stage. Right effort pays attention to these conditions and makes small adjustments, resting when tired, stepping away when overwhelmed, setting boundaries when overstretched. This is not suppression of thought, but care for the soil in which thoughts grow. By tending to conditions, you reduce the chance of spirals forming. Abandoning unwholesome states requires kindness as well as discipline. When you notice you are already caught in overthinking, right effort does not scold or force silence. It gently redirects. The redirection may be to the body, to the breath, to a grounding activity, or to a phrase of compassion. The important part is that you do not feed the spiral with more energy. Abandoning here means withdrawing fuel, allowing the fire to burn out on its own. Cultivating wholesome states is the positive side of the practice. Just as spirals grow through repetition, so do calm, kindness, and clarity. Right effort chooses to nurture these qualities deliberately. This might mean practicing gratitude, extending kindness to yourself, or resting awareness in the simple rhythm of breathing. These acts are not neutral. They carve new grooves in the mind, making wholesome states more likely to arise in the future. Sustaining wholesome states means protecting and strengthening them once they appear. Peace is delicate when it first arises. Right effort guards it gently, avoiding conditions that would scatter it. This is not clinging, but respect. You do not grasp at peace desperately, but you also do not abandon it carelessly. You stay with it long enough for it to deepen into a more stable habit. Right effort is often misunderstood as sheer willpower. Many people approach it as a battle against thought, straining to suppress what arises. But strain itself becomes another source of agitation. True right effort feels more like alignment than force. It is the effort of guiding a sailboat with the wind, not dragging it across land. You learn where to place attention so that energy flows naturally, without resistance. This teaching also reveals that laziness and indulgence are forms of wrong effort. When you give in to spirals because you feel powerless, you are still applying energy into rumination. Right effort is not passivity. It is choosing the direction of your energy consciously. Even the smallest act of redirecting attention, done consistently, is right effort. One practical way to explore this is through awareness of posture. When overthinking, the body often collapses or tenses. Right effort includes sitting upright, breathing fully, creating conditions of steadiness. The body supports the mind, and by aligning physically, you guide energy without strain. This small adjustment makes it easier for awareness to stay balanced. Another way is through the rhythm of daily habits. Right effort is not confined to meditation. It is present in how you use your time, the media you consume, the conversations you engage in. Every choice directs energy somewhere. By choosing habits that nurture clarity instead of agitation, you shape the field in which thoughts arise. Over time, wholesome habits replace unhealthy ones naturally, not through battle, but through steady redirection. Right effort also emphasizes balance between intensity and rest. Too much striving leads to burnout, too little to stagnation. The middle path is attentive and consistent, but gentle. You return again and again to awareness without harshness. If you wander, you come back softly. This rhythm prevents the extremes that make practice unsustainable. There is also joy in right effort. When energy is aligned with what nourishes peace, the mind feels lighter. Overthinking is heavy because it wastes energy in endless cycles. Right effort frees that energy, directing it into presence, compassion, and clarity. This freedom is not dry discipline, but a quiet joy, the satisfaction of living in harmony with the natural flow of the mind. In overthinking, effort is unconscious. The spiral builds because attention keeps pouring into it without awareness. Right effort makes effort conscious. You choose where to place attention, you notice when it has been misplaced, and you gently return. This conscious guidance transforms the entire landscape of thought. The teaching also shows that right effort is cumulative. Each small act of redirection builds strength over time. Just as muscles grow with consistent exercise, the mind grows steady with consistent effort. At first, the results may feel small, but with practice, the mind naturally turns toward peace more often than toward rumination. This gradual change is the fruit of persistence. To integrate right effort, reflect daily on how energy was spent. Did you feed spirals or redirect them? Did you nurture kindness or rehearse criticism? Did you rest in awareness or wander in distraction? This reflection strengthens discernment. Over time, it becomes second nature to guide energy wisely without force. Right effort is the discipline of living in alignment with wisdom. It is effort that does not exhaust but sustains, effort that does not tighten but frees. By practicing it, you learn that peace is not the absence of effort, but the wise use of it. Overthinking loses its fuel because the energy that once fed it is now directed toward clarity and balance. Every breath, every choice becomes a step along this steady path where effort itself becomes a source of ease rather than strain. Directing energy with balance shows you that clarity is not about fighting thoughts or giving in to them, but about guiding attention wisely without strain. Yet, even when you learn to channel effort, the restless nature of the mind can still pull you in countless directions. It jumps from one worry to another, from past regrets to future fears, rarely content with stillness. Zen offers a profound image for working with this restlessness. The ox herding pictures, a series of symbolic stages that describe the journey of taming the wandering mind. These images, painted centuries ago, map the process of recognizing, training, and eventually resting with the mind in peace. The ox represents the restless mind itself. At first, it seems wild, difficult to control, constantly running off into tangled forests of thought. The herder represents awareness, the steady presence that seeks to guide the mind. Each stage of the sequence shows how awareness learns to meet the mind with patience, persistence, and compassion, until restlessness is no longer a prison, but a field of freedom. For anyone caught in overthinking, this map is invaluable, because it illustrates that taming the mind is not about sudden mastery, but about steady progress, step by step. The journey begins with the sense of being lost. In the first stage, the ox is nowhere in sight, and the herder wanders searching. This is how overthinking often feels. You know your mind is unsettled, but you cannot see clearly what is happening. The first step is awareness itself, realizing that you are caught in restlessness. Without this recognition, the ox runs wild unseen, and you are dragged unconsciously by it. With recognition, the search begins, and even the act of searching is already progress. Next comes the discovery of footprints. You start to notice the signs of overthinking, the tension in your body, the repetitive patterns in your thoughts, the restless energy that will not let you rest. These footprints are evidence of the ox's presence. At this stage, you may not yet control the mind, but you can begin to track it. You see the patterns forming, and with each recognition, you grow more familiar with how restlessness shows itself. This awareness interrupts the cycle and gives you space to act differently. Eventually, the ox itself is spotted. The restless mind is seen directly for what it is, a wild energy, powerful but not unmanageable. In practice, this means you notice a spiral forming in real time. Instead of being swept away, you see the thought clearly and acknowledge its nature. This direct seeing is not always comfortable. The ox is strong, and the mind can feel unruly, but it is necessary. You cannot guide what you refuse to face. Once the ox is seen, the struggle of taming begins. The herder grasps the rope, pulling and guiding, sometimes being dragged, sometimes holding firm. This stage mirrors the effort of training attention. The mind resists discipline, running back toward familiar habits of worry. But with steady persistence, you bring it back again and again to the present, to the breath, to awareness. The key here is patience. Taming is not domination. It is steady guidance, repeated without anger or despair. With practice, the ox begins to yield. The once wild energy grows calmer. Thoughts still arise, but they no longer stampede. Awareness learns the rhythm of guidance, and the ox learns to trust. In this stage, overthinking still occurs, but less intensely. You notice it sooner, redirect it more gently, and recover more quickly. What once dragged you for hours may now hold you for minutes. The relationship between awareness and mind begins to soften into harmony. As the training deepens, the ox follows more willingly. You no longer need to pull with force. The mind begins to rest in awareness naturally. Thoughts still appear, but they arise like waves in a calm sea, no longer storms. At this stage, peace grows not from silencing the mind, but from the relationship of trust between awareness and thought. You see that restlessness is not an enemy, but a force that can be guided. Eventually, the ox is fully tamed. In the images, it walks beside the herder peacefully. This represents the stage where thoughts arise but do not disturb. The mind is still active, but awareness is steady enough that restlessness has no power to overwhelm. You no longer fear overthinking because even when thoughts come, you remain calm. The ox is still present, but its wildness has dissolved into companionship. Beyond taming, the pictures continue. The ox disappears, leaving only the herder. This stage symbolizes the realization that the mind's restlessness was never separate from awareness. The distinction between me and my thoughts softens. You no longer see the mind as something to conquer, but as part of the whole of being. Overthinking loses its identity as a problem because it no longer defines you. Awareness is free, spacious, unbound. Finally, the herder returns to the marketplace, carrying the peace he has discovered back into ordinary life. This is perhaps the most important stage for daily worries. The purpose of taming the mind is not to escape the world, but to live within it more fully without being enslaved by thought. When you return to relationships, work, and challenges, you bring the clarity and steadiness of the journey with you. The restless mind no longer controls your life. Instead, it becomes a tool used when needed and released when not. The ox herding sequence is a map, but it is also a reassurance. It shows that taming the restless mind is a process, not a single leap. Each stage matters. Even the early stages, where you only notice the footprints of thought, are steps toward freedom. Overthinking feels endless because you believe you are failing whenever restlessness appears. But the ox-herding pictures remind you that struggle is part of the journey. Each return to awareness, no matter how small, is progress. Applying this map to your own life means watching how the mind behaves and recognizing which stage you are in. Sometimes you may feel lost. Sometimes you may be wrestling with the rope. Sometimes you may walk peacefully with the ox. None of these are failures. They are natural parts of the path. By meeting each stage with patience and persistence, you build the resilience to continue. This teaching also emphasizes compassion. Just as the herder must treat the ox with steadiness and care, you must treat your own mind with gentleness. If you approach restlessness with anger or force, the ox resists more fiercely. If you approach with patience, the ox learns to trust. Compassion is not weakness. It is the most effective way to tame the wild energy of thought. Through this lens, overthinking becomes less of a curse and more of a training ground. Each spiral is an opportunity to practice awareness, each restless night a chance to guide the ox. The journey may be long, but every step reshapes the relationship between awareness and thought. The once wild mind becomes a companion, and restlessness transforms into a doorway to peace. In daily practice, you can use the ox herding sequence as a reminder. When you feel overwhelmed, recall. Perhaps you are searching for footprints. When you feel caught in struggle, recall. This is the stage of taming. When you feel calm, recall. This is the ox walking beside you. These reminders prevent despair and encourage persistence. They show that the process itself is the path, and peace grows through walking it patiently. The path of taming the restless mind shows that struggle and patience both have their place. The ox herding pictures reveal how awareness can gently guide the chaos of thought until calm and trust are established. But even when the ox begins to walk beside you, there is still a risk of hardness. Many people treat their own thinking mind like an enemy, something to fight, punish, or silence. This harshness only adds another layer of tension. What softens the grip of overthinking more deeply than force is compassion. The next step is learning to meet the thinking mind itself with metta, the practice of loving kindness, so that restlessness no longer feels like a battle, but an opportunity to extend care. Compassion toward the mind begins with recognizing that it only tries to protect you. Every spiral of worry, every replay of a mistake, every anxious prediction is the mind's attempt to keep you safe. It is misguided, but it is not malicious. When you see this, the heart softens. Instead of meeting thoughts with anger, "Why am I like this? Why can't I stop?" you respond with kindness. "Thank you, mind, for trying to help, but I can rest now." This shift turns overthinking from a war zone into a space of healing. The practice of metta traditionally begins with extending kindness toward oneself. Many struggle with this because self-criticism feels more natural than self-love. But without self-kindness, the cycle of overthinking tightens. You cannot bully yourself into peace. You must offer the same care you would offer a dear friend. This might take the form of gentle phrases repeated silently. "May I be safe. May I be at ease. May my mind find rest." At first, the words may feel empty. With repetition, they become seeds that soften the harshness of self-judgment. Compassion also changes the way you meet intrusive thoughts. Instead of reacting with fear or shame, you meet them with patience. A thought arises, and instead of pushing it away, you say inwardly, "I see you. You can be here. You will pass." This attitude removes urgency. Thoughts no longer need to be controlled or defeated. They are held with the warmth of acceptance. Over time, this reduces their intensity, because what we resist persists, but what we meet with kindness loses its power. Metta is not limited to words. It can be felt physically. Place a hand gently on your chest when the mind is restless. Let the warmth of touch remind you of care. This simple act sends signals of safety through the nervous system, calming the body, which in turn calms the mind. Overthinking often escalates because the body reacts with tension. Compassion interrupts this loop by creating safety at a physical level. Practicing compassion toward the mind also means allowing mistakes. You will still find yourself caught in spirals. You will still forget to let go. Instead of responding with frustration, you can treat each lapse as another chance to practice kindness. Say softly, "It's okay to forget. It's okay to wander. I can return now." This attitude keeps practice sustainable. Harshness burns energy. Kindness replenishes it. This practice can be extended into daily life. When a worry arises about work, family, or health, pause and ask, what does this thought need? Can I offer kindness instead of fear? Sometimes the mind only needs reassurance, not solutions. By meeting it with compassion, you fulfill its need without fueling the spiral. This is not indulgence, but wise care. You soothe the restlessness without clinging to it. Metta also reveals the universality of restlessness. Everyone experiences worry, fear, and doubt. When you practice compassion toward your own mind, you recognize this shared humanity. You are not broken or unusual, you are human. This recognition reduces shame, which is itself a major driver of overthinking. When shame falls away, the mind relaxes more easily. There is also a deeper transformation. By practicing kindness toward your thoughts, you shift the very foundation of identity. Instead of being the one who overthinks, you become the one who meets the mind with care. This change in relationship matters more than silencing thought. Peace does not come from eliminating restlessness, but from transforming how you hold it. Metta meditation offers a practical structure. Begin by sitting quietly and repeating phrases of kindness for yourself. Then extend them outward, to a loved one, to a neutral person, to someone difficult, and eventually to all beings. When practiced consistently, this softens not only the mind's restlessness, but the heart's tendency to judge. Overthinking often narrows focus onto the self, amplifying problems. Compassion widens the circle, dissolving isolation. This widening also shifts the meaning of thoughts themselves. A worry about failure becomes an opportunity to wish kindness toward all who feel inadequate. A memory of loss becomes a bridge to those who grieve everywhere. In this way, thoughts that once trapped you become doorways to empathy. Instead of spiraling inward, you turn outward with compassion, and the energy of worry transforms into care. Compassion also reveals itself in patience. Overthinking often feels urgent, demanding immediate resolution. Compassion slows this urgency. It whispers, "You do not have to solve this now. You can rest." This gentle patience weakens the compulsion to rehearse problems endlessly. By allowing time, you create space, and in space, clarity arises naturally. The power of compassion is that it transforms the very texture of the mind. Restless thoughts, when met with kindness, lose their sharp edges. They soften, dissolve, and pass more easily. The mind itself feels less like an enemy and more like a companion learning to rest. Over time, this companionship grows into trust. The mind trusts that it does not need to shout to be heard because awareness will meet it kindly. Treating the mind with compassion also means respecting its limits. You cannot demand constant clarity. Fatigue, stress, and distraction will happen. Compassion accepts these conditions as part of being human. Instead of attacking yourself for being restless, you care for yourself more deeply, resting, nourishing, supporting. This creates the foundation for long-term transformation. The practice of compassion toward the thinking mind is radical because it reverses the habit of hostility. Instead of a battlefield, the inner world becomes a place of care. Thoughts no longer dominate because they are not fought and they are not indulged. They are held gently, like guests who are welcomed and released. This is how loving kindness disarms overthinking, not by force, but by softening its roots with warmth. Meeting the mind with compassion softens its harsh edges, showing that even restless thoughts can be cared for instead of fought. But there is another layer to this struggle, one that Buddhist teaching reveals through the figure of Mara, the inner trickster, the tempter, the voice that whispers doubt, fear, and distraction. In the stories of the Buddha, Mara appears not with weapons, but with cunning, planting seeds of hesitation, trying to lure him away from clarity. For those who wrestle with overthinking, Mara's whisper is alive and active. It is that subtle voice that says, "You are not enough. This problem will never end. You must keep worrying or you'll lose control." Recognizing this voice for what it is changes everything, because once you see the trick, you can smile at it instead of obeying it. Mara's whisper works by disguising itself as truth. Overthinking begins when a thought feels authoritative, urgent, undeniable. But when you recognize that such thoughts are whispers of Mara, you step back from their grip. They are not revelations, they are distractions. They do not guide you to wisdom, they bind you to fear. Seeing them as Mara strips them of their power. A thought that once felt overwhelming is reduced to a trick you no longer need to fall for. This recognition requires discernment. Not every thought is Mara's whisper. Some thoughts are practical, guiding you to act wisely in daily life. The distinction lies in the effect. Does the thought bring clarity, or does it tighten into endless loops of anxiety? Mara's voice always creates agitation. It demands more, it unsettles, it pushes you toward excess. When you notice this effect, you can name it. This is Mara. Naming exposes the trickster. What was once a hidden force becomes visible, and visibility dissolves its hold. The Buddha himself, even after awakening, continued to face Mara. The stories describe Mara returning again and again, whispering new doubts. This is crucial to understand. Wisdom does not eliminate Mara. The difference is that wisdom recognizes the voice for what it is. The Buddha smiled at Mara, saying, "I see you." That smile is the key. It is not anger, not fear, not resistance. It is calm recognition. You too can meet overthinking with this attitude. When the spiral begins, instead of collapsing under it, you can smile inwardly and say, "I see you, Mara." The recognition itself disarms the cycle. This practice is powerful because it changes your relationship with doubt and fear. When you treat every anxious thought as serious truth, the spiral tightens. When you see it as Mara's whisper, you shift from identification to observation. The thought no longer defines you. It becomes a visitor, a trick to be acknowledged and released. This perspective creates space. Instead of reacting automatically, you pause, and in that pause, freedom appears. Mara's whisper also thrives on shame. It tells you, "You are broken because you think too much," or "Others are calm, but you are weak." These whispers feed overthinking by turning the mind against itself. Compassion, as practiced earlier, dissolves shame, but naming Mara adds another layer. It shows you that shame is not your voice, but the trickster's. What felt like self-attack is recognized as illusion. By refusing to take ownership of Mara's whispers, you break the cycle of self-condemnation. There is wisdom in treating these whispers lightly. If you fight them fiercely, they grow stronger. If you obey them, they control you. But if you smile at them, they lose weight. The smile is not naive. It is rooted in knowledge that Mara cannot harm you unless you give in. Overthinking thrives on seriousness, on the belief that every thought must be solved. The smile breaks this seriousness, reminding you that not every whisper deserves attention. Practically, you can train this recognition by pausing when a strong thought arises and asking, "Is this Mara?" If the thought carries urgency, fear, or despair without clarity, it likely is. By labeling it as such, you step back from its grip. Over time, this habit becomes second nature. Thoughts that once pulled you into hours of rumination are dismissed quickly as whispers of the trickster. This practice also cultivates resilience. Mara does not disappear, but your response changes. Instead of being worn down by each cycle, you grow stronger. Each time you smile at the whisper and let it pass, you reinforce the habit of freedom. Overthinking loses its fuel because the engine of fear and urgency no longer runs unchecked. There is also a collective aspect to Mara. In the stories, Mara commands armies of illusions, sending waves of distractions to overwhelm. In modern life, these armies take the form of social pressures, endless information, and cultural messages that feed anxiety. Recognizing Mara's presence in these external influences helps you step back from them as well. Not every demand from the world deserves obedience. By naming them as whispers of Mara, you maintain your clarity in the midst of noise. This teaching also emphasizes humility. Even the Buddha faced Mara after awakening, which means no one is beyond doubt or distraction. The difference is awareness. Overthinking does not make you weak. It makes you human. Recognizing Mara reminds you that doubt is part of the path, not a personal failure. Meeting it with awareness and a smile turns what once felt like defeat into practice. In daily life, the practice might look like this. A worry begins. What if I fail tomorrow? You pause, breathe, and say quietly, "I see you, Mara." The thought loses urgency. Another arises. "They don't respect me." Again, "I see you, Mara." Instead of spiraling, you return to calm. Each time you name the whisper, you strengthen the habit of recognition. The voice may return, but it no longer deceives you. Mara's whisper is most dangerous when it goes unnoticed. By bringing it into the light, you transform the entire dynamic. Overthinking becomes less of a personal battle and more of a practice of recognition. Each whisper is an opportunity to deepen awareness, to cultivate steadiness, to smile. In this way, what once bound you becomes the very ground of your freedom. Recognizing Mara's whisper teaches you that not every thought carries truth, and that many voices in the mind are simply tricks dressed in urgency. Smiling at them weakens their grip, but another subtle danger still remains. Even when you learn to see through doubt and distraction, the mind may cling tightly to ideas about reality itself, mistaking concepts for the living truth. Zen warns of this through the parable of the finger pointing to the moon. The finger is a symbol, a guide, a pointer, but it is not the moon. In the same way, thoughts about reality are only pointers, not reality itself. Clinging to them blinds you to the direct experience of life, just as staring at a pointing finger blinds you from seeing the vast sky it directs you toward. Overthinking often lives in this fallacy. The mind builds endless descriptions, analyses, and theories about life, as though holding the idea were the same as living the experience. You think about love instead of feeling it. Think about peace instead of resting in it. Think about happiness instead of allowing joy to arise. The finger becomes more important than the moon. In this way, thoughts that were meant to point you toward life become substitutes for life itself, and the cycle of restlessness deepens. Thoughts are useful. They guide, describe, and help us navigate. Without them, language and planning would be impossible. But the problem comes when you confuse the map with the territory. A map shows directions, but it is not the ground you walk on. A thought about peace is not peace. A memory of happiness is not happiness. A plan for the future is not the future. When the mind clings to the map, it misses the journey itself. This is why overthinking feels so hollow. It circles around concepts but rarely touches direct reality. The Buddha consistently pointed away from clinging to words and concepts. His teachings were meant as rafts to cross a river, not treasures to hold on to forever. Once the river is crossed, the raft is no longer needed. But overthinking loves to build rafts upon rafts, debating their structure, worrying about their weight, while never setting foot into the water. This obsession with thought about keeps you from living the truth of the moment. Direct experience reveals a depth that no thought can capture. To see the moon with your own eyes is completely different from hearing it described. To drink water is different from reading the word water. The finger pointing can guide you, but if you never look beyond it, you remain thirsty. Overthinking keeps you staring at the finger, analyzing its shape, while ignoring the coolness of water already waiting to refresh you. This fallacy shows up in subtle ways in daily life. You may think endlessly about whether you are happy instead of noticing the moments when contentment quietly appears. You may replay ideas about who you are instead of experiencing yourself directly in the present. You may overanalyze love instead of simply sharing time and presence with someone. Each time, the thought substitutes for the reality, and overthinking grows because thought can never fully resolve the gap between idea and experience. The practice here is to return again and again to direct contact. Instead of thinking about breathing, feel the breath. Instead of analyzing whether the body is tense, notice the sensations directly. Instead of rehearsing what might be said in a conversation, listen to the words being spoken now. This shift pulls you out of the finger-pointing trap and into the living presence of the moment. Non-clinging, practiced earlier, becomes essential here. Thoughts about reality will arise. They will point, describe, and compare. You do not need to suppress them, but you also do not need to cling to them as substitutes for life. Let them point, then look beyond them. Use the finger to find the moon, then let your eyes rest on the moon itself. This is the balance. Acknowledge the thought, but do not stop there. This teaching also reshapes how you understand spiritual practice itself. Even teachings, wise as they are fingers pointing. Clinging to doctrines, words, or philosophies without living them leads to more overthinking. You may analyze endlessly what compassion means without ever practicing kindness. You may study impermanence without noticing a flower bloom and fade in front of you. Right practice means letting the teachings direct you to reality, not replacing reality with teachings. Overthinking thrives when it convinces you that thoughts about life are enough, but direct experience undercuts this illusion instantly. To taste food is more satisfying than imagining it. To rest in silence is more calming than reading about calm. To watch a sunset is more profound than describing colors. Each time you return to direct contact, the cycle of thought loosens, because thought cannot compete with reality itself. A powerful practice is to ask yourself, am I with the moon or with the finger? When you notice spirals of thought, pause and ask, am I thinking about life or am I in life? This question interrupts the cycle and invites you back into experience. Even simple acts, feeling your breath, noticing the ground, sensing your heartbeat, shift you into direct presence. From there, overthinking loses its grip because reality requires no endless commentary. This teaching also brings humility. No thought, no matter how refined, can capture the full truth of existence. Clinging to thoughts as ultimate blinds you to the mystery that cannot be spoken. Overthinking is, in many ways, an attempt to cage reality in concepts. But reality is vast, fluid, beyond containment. Accepting this brings freedom. You no longer demand certainty from thoughts. You rest in the openness of direct being. The finger pointing to the moon fallacy is a reminder that thought is a guide, not a destination. It warns you that clinging to mental images creates distance from life itself. But it also offers hope, because the moment you let go of clinging, the moon is already there, shining, needing no explanation. By turning attention away from endless commentary and into experience, you break the cycle of overthinking and discover the richness that thought alone can never provide. Clinging to thoughts about reality instead of living reality itself shows how overthinking traps you in endless concepts while keeping you from the simplicity of direct experience. Yet, knowing this still leaves a challenge. How do you return to life when the mind has already pulled you into a spiral? Words can point you back, but the surest doorway is through the body itself. Vipassana, the practice of direct observation, offers this exit. By grounding awareness in breath, sensations, and posture, you step out of the web of thought and into the immediacy of presence. The body is always here. Unlike thoughts which fly into past and future, the body exists only in the present moment. Anchoring attention to it interrupts the cycle of overthinking because it shifts the stage entirely, from imagination to reality. When the mind insists on replaying old scenes or forecasting what could go wrong, the breath quietly reminds you, you are here, alive, breathing now. Each inhalation and exhalation is proof that presence is possible. Grounding begins with the breath, not as an idea, but as sensation. Feel the coolness of air entering, the warmth leaving, the gentle rise and fall of the chest. No commentary is needed. Each moment of contact with breath interrupts the commentary of thought. Even if thoughts continue in the background, they lose dominance because attention is placed elsewhere, on something steady, neutral, and endlessly available. Sensations in the body provide even more anchors. Notice warmth in the hands, weight in the feet, pressure against the seat. Each sensation is fleeting, shifting moment by moment. By observing these changes, you experience impermanence directly, not as a concept, but as reality felt in the body. This dissolves spirals of overthinking because you see that the present is never static. Attention becomes absorbed in the unfolding of sensation, leaving little room for the repetitive cycles of thought. Posture itself becomes a practice. When caught in worry, the body often collapses inward, shoulders tense, breath shallow. By sitting upright, relaxing the shoulders, opening the chest, you send signals of safety to the nervous system. This physical alignment supports mental steadiness. Vipassana does not separate mind and body, it shows their unity. The way you hold your body shapes the way thoughts move. Grounding in posture provides a direct tool for shifting inner states without needing to argue with thought. Observing the body in Vipassana is not about judgment. You do not label sensations as good or bad. You notice them as they are. Pain, tingling, heaviness, lightness, all arise and pass. This equanimity extends to thoughts themselves. As you watch sensations come and go, you learn that thoughts too are just mental sensations, no more permanent than a flicker of warmth or a twitch of muscle. This recognition weakens attachment to them because you see that they belong to the same category of passing events. Overthinking often creates disconnection, pulling you away from your body into abstract realms. Vipassana reverses this, reuniting awareness with embodiment. Each time you return to sensation, you reclaim ground from the spiral. You begin to feel anchored again, not lost in drifting thought. This anchoring is not escape. It is returning to what has always been here, waiting quietly beneath the noise of the mind. The practice also reshapes your relationship with discomfort. Many spirals begin when the mind reacts to unpleasant sensations, tightness in the chest, knots in the stomach, restlessness in the legs. Instead of resisting these sensations with layers of thought, Vipassana invites you to observe them directly. As you watch, they shift and dissolve on their own. The fear of discomfort fades because you realize it is not permanent. By meeting the body directly, you cut off the need for stories about it. Vipassana also deepens patience. Watching sensations change slowly teaches you to trust natural unfolding. You see that nothing needs to be rushed. This patience carries into thought as well. Instead of forcing the mind to stop, you allow it to settle naturally, just as sensations rise and fall. Overthinking loses urgency in this slower rhythm. Practical application is simple, yet profound. When a spiral begins, pause and bring attention to the soles of your feet. Feel their contact with the ground. Let awareness rest there. Slowly expand to the breath, the chest, the shoulders. In this process, thoughts may still come, but they no longer command the stage. The body holds you, reminding you that the present moment is stronger than any story in the mind. Consistency deepens the effect. Practicing Vipassana regularly builds familiarity with this grounding. Over time, the body becomes a trusted refuge. You know that whenever spirals begin, you can return to breath and sensation. This confidence itself reduces anxiety because you no longer feel helpless before the flood of thought. You have an exit, always available. This grounding also expands into movement. Walking slowly, noticing each step, each shift of weight, is vipassana in action. Washing dishes, feeling the temperature of the water, the texture of the plate, is practice. The more you bring awareness to the body in ordinary activities, the less room overthinking has to dominate. Presence expands beyond meditation into daily life. Vipassana is sometimes called insight meditation because it reveals truths directly. Observing the body shows impermanence, non-clinging, and the nature of suffering as lived experience. These insights are not abstract philosophies, but realizations born of direct contact. Overthinking cannot compete with this clarity. Thought is commentary. Insight is seeing. Vipassana anchors you in seeing. As the practice matures, even thoughts themselves are observed in the same way as sensations. They arise, shift, and dissolve. They are felt as movements in the mind, not commands to obey. Over time, this reduces identification with them. You stop saying, "I am my thoughts," and begin seeing, thoughts are passing events. This is the deepest grounding of all, awareness resting in itself, steady regardless of what arises. In the end, Vipassana offers not escape from thought, but freedom within it. By grounding in the body, you discover that rest is always available, not by silencing the mind through force, but by shifting attention to the reality of breath, sensation, and posture. The spirals dissolve because they cannot compete with the immediacy of presence. Each return to the body is a step out of the maze of overthinking and a step into the clarity of now. Grounding attention in the body shows that you can always step out of the maze of thought by returning to what is present, here and now. Yet even with this practice, many people still carry a sense of isolation, as if their overthinking is a personal flaw, a defect of character, something wrong with them alone. This belief deepens shame and makes spirals harder to release. But Buddhist wisdom offers another perspective: interbeing. The truth that nothing exists separately, not even your thoughts. What you call my overthinking is not only yours, it is shaped by culture, family, and society. To see this dissolves the burden of isolation, because it shows that your patterns are not a private curse, but part of a web of shared human experience. Thoughts arise because of conditions. Just as a seed grows only in soil, with sunlight and water, thoughts emerge from the environment in which you live. Anxieties about success or failure do not appear in a vacuum. They are influenced by cultural values, by family expectations, by social comparisons. Worries about safety are amplified by the collective fears in the media or the stories passed down through generations. Even the language in which you think is given to you by others. The moment you see this, overthinking becomes less of a personal enemy. It is not that you are uniquely broken, it is that you are participating in patterns much larger than yourself. This perspective removes shame. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" you begin to ask, "What conditions shaped this pattern?" That shift changes everything. You are no longer judging yourself harshly, but examining the soil in which your thoughts grew. Maybe your family modeled constant vigilance, teaching you to prepare for every danger. Maybe society taught you that worth depends on productivity, fueling endless self-criticism. These influences are not your fault. They are shared currents of culture carried by many. Interbeing also reveals the collective nature of relief. When you begin to practice mindfulness and release overthinking, you are not only helping yourself, you are shifting patterns that ripple outward. A calmer mind influences family, friends, and community. Your choice to interrupt spirals plants seeds of calm in others who witness you. Just as you inherited thought patterns from your surroundings, you also give back to those surroundings. Interbeing shows that healing is never private, it is relational. This teaching also challenges the illusion of independence. Modern culture often emphasizes the individual as though each person is a separate entity entirely responsible for their inner world. But interbeing shows that every thought carries the imprints of countless others. The pressure to look a certain way, to achieve, to belong, all of it arises from shared systems. Recognizing this softens the inner critic. You stop blaming yourself for carrying burdens that were handed to you. A practical reflection is to trace a single thought back to its origins. For example, the worry, "I must not fail." Ask, where did this come from? Perhaps from a parent's high expectations, which were shaped by their own upbringing, which in turn was influenced by economic or cultural pressures. Follow the chain far enough, and you see that the thought is not yours alone. It is part of an interwoven fabric, stretching through generations. This understanding loosens its power, because it no longer feels like a fixed identity. Interbeing also expands compassion. When you recognize that others carry similar inherited patterns, you see their struggles with new eyes. The colleague who seems perfectionistic, the friend who worries constantly, the parent who criticizes too much, all are acting from the same web of influences. Instead of resentment, compassion grows. You see them not as enemies, but as fellow travelers in the same human conditions. This perspective even transforms how you view society. Overthinking is not just an individual habit. It is mirrored in collective behaviors. Entire cultures ruminate on security, on success, on identity. Media cycles replay fears endlessly, just as individual minds replay worries. Seeing this, you understand that your personal practice of calming the mind contributes to the collective healing of overthinking. Each act of mindfulness is a countercurrent to the societal habit of restlessness. Vipassana taught you to anchor in the body, but interbeing shows you that the body itself is connected to all life. The air you breathe is shared by all beings. The food you eat is grown by countless hands. In the same way, the thoughts you experience are not separate. They are shaped by relationships, stories, and histories. Realizing this changes the way you hold them. They are no longer heavy personal possessions. They are currents moving through a larger stream. This recognition does not mean avoiding responsibility. You still have the power to choose how you respond. But it means carrying that responsibility without the crushing weight of shame. You are not alone in the habit of overthinking. You are part of a shared human condition, and because it is shared, it can be shifted together. Each act of awareness is both personal and collective. Interbeing also helps when overthinking turns toward loneliness. Many spirals begin with the fear of being cut off, of being isolated. But when you see the depth of connection in everything, loneliness softens. You realize you are connected through every breath, every meal, every word. Even your struggles link you to countless others. The very thoughts that once made you feel alone are proof of shared humanity. In practice, you can explore interbeing through reflection during spirals. When caught in self-criticism, pause and ask, who else has felt this? The answer is millions. When replaying a fear, ask, where did this come from? The answer always points to conditions beyond your control. This inquiry breaks the illusion of separateness and transforms despair into compassion. The strength of this teaching is that it expands perspective. Overthinking shrinks awareness, trapping you in a loop of me and my problem. Interbeing enlarges awareness, reminding you that no problem belongs to you alone. This shift is not abstract. It is felt as relief in the heart. A burden shared is a burden lightened, even when the sharing is only an understanding. Ultimately, interbeing shows that thoughts themselves are part of the great web of conditions. They are not isolated possessions to be clung to. They are visitors arising from countless influences. Seeing this makes it easier to release them. Just as you do not claim ownership of the wind or the rain, you no longer need to claim ownership of every thought. You are the space in which they pass, not the creator of every whisper. And in this recognition, the grip of overthinking loosens, replaced by a sense of belonging to something vast, connected, and whole. Seeing thoughts through the lens of interbeing shows that they are not private possessions, but part of a vast network of conditions. This recognition lifts the burden of shame and reveals how deeply connected you are to others through even the most restless mental patterns. Yet knowing that thoughts are shared does not always stop the mind from spinning. Overthinking thrives on analysis, and the habit of breaking everything into explanations runs deep. Zen offers a radical antidote to this habit. Koans, paradoxical riddles that cannot be solved by logic. These teachings shock the restless mind out of its endless analysis and return you to the immediacy of presence. A koan is not a puzzle in the ordinary sense. It is not designed to be solved with reason or to provide a clear answer. Instead, it presents the mind with something it cannot digest in the usual way. A monk asks, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" Another master declares, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him." At first, the analytical mind leaps forward, trying to interpret, explain, or debate. But as it fails, something deeper is revealed. Presence beyond thought. The koan is a doorway, forcing you to let go of analysis because analysis cannot reach the truth it points to. This is precisely why koans are so effective for overthinking. Spirals form because the mind believes every problem can be solved through more analysis. Koans show the limits of this approach. They invite you into a silence that arises not from suppression, but from the exhaustion of logic. When the mind finally surrenders, awareness opens naturally. In that opening, there is direct presence, simple, alive, beyond the cycle of worry. Koans also reveal the playfulness of Zen. Overthinking is heavy, serious, and full of tension. Koans disrupt this heaviness with paradox, humor, and absurdity. They remind you that reality is not bound by your categories. A koan may feel like nonsense, but in its nonsense lies freedom. It pulls the rug from under the intellect, showing that life cannot be fully contained in words. This frees you from the prison of explanation and allows you to experience directly. For someone caught in spirals, practicing with a koan can be transformative. When a repetitive thought arises, instead of trying to solve it, you can introduce a koan as a counterpoint. Ask yourself, what was my face before I was born? The overthinking mind cannot settle on an answer. It turns in circles until it tires, leaving space for silence. That silence is not forced. It is the natural pause that comes when thought realizes it cannot win. Koans also train humility. They show you that the intellect, while useful, is limited. Overthinking is often fueled by arrogance, the belief that if you just think harder, you can control reality. Koans reveal the limits of control. They bring you back to not knowing, which is the true ground of openness. In not knowing, there is space for presence, for curiosity, for freedom from the compulsive need to solve everything. This teaching also deepens awareness of direct experience. When the intellect fails, the senses awaken. Instead of circling in thought, you notice the sound of a bird, the texture of breath, the stillness of the moment. Koans guide you out of the mind's stories and into the vividness of reality. Overthinking collapses because it cannot operate without analysis. Koans do not silence thought through suppression. They silence it by showing its limits. There is also a therapeutic dimension. Overthinking often attacks the self with questions that have no satisfying answers. Am I good enough? What will happen if I fail? These are unsolvable by nature. Treating them like koans transforms the relationship. Instead of believing the questions require resolution, you hold them lightly as paradoxes. They lose their weight because you no longer demand logical closure. You rest in openness, and the spiral dissolves. In practice, koans are not meant to be memorized as tricks, but lived as inquiries. A teacher might assign one to a student who meditates on it daily. The goal is not an intellectual solution, but a shift in perception. For example, does a dog have Buddha nature? The student wrestles until reasoning collapses, and in the collapse, insight arises. Not an answer, but a direct taste of awareness beyond concepts. This approach can be adapted to daily worries. When the mind begins its cycle, replaying conversations, predicting outcomes, you can ask a question that undercuts the spiral. Who is it that worries? Or, where does this thought arise? These questions are not meant to be answered analytically. They are meant to turn the mind back on itself, revealing the ground of awareness. The spiral weakens because attention shifts from content to presence. Koans also demonstrate the value of paradox in daily life. Overthinking thrives on binary thinking, right or wrong, success or failure, safe or unsafe. Koans disrupt binaries. They reveal that reality is not confined to opposites. This flexibility loosens the rigidity of spirals. When you see that life is larger than categories, the need to resolve every worry fades. You can rest in ambiguity, which overthinking normally resists. One of the most famous koans asks, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" At first, the mind struggles, searching for clever answers, but eventually it realizes the question itself is the teaching. It points you to the futility of analysis and the possibility of silence. For someone trapped in overthinking, This is liberating. It shows that not every question deserves an answer, and that peace lies in the space beyond solutions. Working with koans also cultivates resilience to confusion. Overthinking arises from the fear of uncertainty, the need to resolve contradictions. Koans train you to rest within uncertainty. They teach you that not knowing is not failure, but a gateway. When you become comfortable with paradox, the spirals of worry lose their urgency. You no longer need to resolve every contradiction. You can rest in the richness of mystery. The practice of koans is not about escaping life, but about meeting it more fully. By disrupting the dominance of thought, they return you to direct experience. They show that the present moment is deeper than any analysis. For the overactive mind, they are a gift, a mirror that reflects the limits of intellect and the vastness beyond. By working with them, you discover that peace is not found in solving every thought, but in stepping into the openness that arises when thought no longer claims to have all the answers. Koans reveal that the restless mind cannot solve itself through endless analysis, and sometimes the most liberating answer is no answer at all. Yet, once the intellect is disarmed, there is still another challenge that rises: the sheer force of inner storms. Thoughts may still rage, emotions may surge, and the mind may feel battered by waves of agitation. In these moments, clever riddles or sharp insights are not enough. What is needed is radical patience, the capacity to endure turbulence without resistance or retaliation. The Buddha illustrated this through the simile of the saw, a story that teaches how to remain steady even when the mind feels cut apart by its own storms. The simile describes monks being told that even if bandits were to capture them and saw through their limbs, they must hold no ill will, not even toward their tormentors. At first hearing, this teaching sounds impossible, almost harsh, but its purpose is profound: to show that true freedom does not depend on circumstances. If patience can be maintained under the image of the saw, then it can be maintained under the far smaller storms of thought and worry. The teaching is not about tolerating harm, but about cultivating a patience so deep that even the worst agitation of the mind cannot uproot it. This radical patience is a powerful antidote to overthinking. Spirals often grow because the mind cannot bear discomfort. A single anxious thought arises, and instead of allowing it to be, the mind rushes to fight, fix, or escape. That resistance fuels more thoughts, which fuel more resistance, until a storm forms. Patience interrupts this cycle. It allows the thought to exist without reaction. Like sitting in the middle of thunder without running for shelter, patience teaches that storms pass on their own when they are not fed by struggle. Practicing this does not mean apathy. It does not mean ignoring pain or pretending agitation does not exist. It means meeting it with steadiness, refusing to add fuel by lashing back. When the mind hurls insults, "You are weak, you will fail," patience listens without retaliation. You do not fight the thought, nor do you obey it. You let it rise and fall like a wave against a shore that never breaks. This refusal to fight back is not weakness, but strength, because it requires more courage to endure without hatred than to lash out in panic. Radical patience also teaches endurance through time. Overthinking thrives on urgency. It whispers that you must resolve the thought now, or else something terrible will happen. patience counters. Not everything needs to be solved in this moment. You can wait. You can let the mind rage without responding. In waiting, the storm loses energy. Urgency dissolves because it depends on your willingness to obey. This patience is trained slowly. Begin with small discomforts. When irritation arises in conversation, practice listening without interrupting. When an itch appears in meditation, notice it without scratching immediately. These small acts build the muscle of patience. Later, when storms of thought come, the same muscle allows you to endure without retaliation. Each moment of patience is like strengthening roots. The stronger the roots, the less the winds of overthinking can uproot you. The simile of the saw also points to compassion. If patience can be maintained even toward those who cause harm, then surely it can be extended to your own mind. Often, the harshest storms are self-inflicted, the inner critic cutting with sharp words. Radical patience meets even this critic without hatred. You do not retaliate against yourself. You allow the voice to be, knowing it will fade, refusing to strengthen it with self-attack. This is patience as love, not just endurance. A deeper aspect of the teaching is that patience transforms suffering into insight. When you sit through a storm without reacting, you begin to see its nature. Thoughts that once seemed unbearable reveal themselves as passing. Emotions that felt eternal show their impermanence. Each act of patience uncovers the truth that storms cannot last. What once felt like endless punishment becomes a lesson in impermanence and resilience. In daily life, this practice is invaluable. When anxiety builds before sleep, radical patience allows you to rest with the racing mind instead of fueling it. The storm of thought may continue, but without resistance, it eventually quiets. When anger flares in conversation, patience keeps you from speaking words you will regret. When worry about the future arises, patience reminds you that clarity will come in time. Each act of patience prevents the spiral from feeding itself. Radical patience is not passivity. It is active endurance, a conscious choice to remain steady. Like a mountain that does not run from storms, you hold your ground. This steadiness is itself transformative. Overthinking loses its grip because it thrives on reaction. When no reaction comes, the cycle starves. The storm may roar, but it cannot uproot what is rooted in patience. The simile of the saw is extreme to make the point clear. If patience can endure the most unimaginable trial, then it can endure the smaller storms of the mind. By practicing daily, you prepare for both the minor irritations and the great surges of thought. Each moment of patience builds strength until eventually storms no longer feel like threats, but like passing weather in a vast sky. Through this teaching, endurance becomes liberation. You discover that you do not need to win against the mind's storms. You only need to remain steady as they pass. In that steadiness lies freedom from overthinking, not by silencing thought, but by refusing to be cut by it. The saw may hum, the storm may rage, but the heart remains unshaken, rooted in patience deeper than fear. Radical patience teaches you that storms of thought do not need to be resisted or retaliated against, that they can rage and still pass without tearing you apart. Yet even with patience, the mind continues to create conditions for restlessness. These conditions are not random. They are fueled by deep-rooted forces that Buddhism identifies as the 5 hindrances: desire, aversion, sloth, restlessness, and doubt. Each acts like hidden fuel feeding the fire of overthinking. To see them clearly is to understand why the mind spins in loops and how to weaken the roots of these patterns. Desire is often disguised as problem-solving. The mind craves certainty, comfort, and resolution, so it clings to thought as a way to gain control. Overthinking begins when desire insists, "If I replay this again, I will feel safe." But the craving for security through thought is endless. Desire never admits satisfaction. It always asks for one more review, one more plan, one more angle. Recognizing desire within overthinking means noticing the craving beneath the thought. Not the story itself, but the hunger for certainty. When you see the craving, you can meet it directly instead of getting lost in the spiral it creates. Aversion fuels overthinking in a different way. Where desire pulls you toward, aversion pushes you away. The mind resists discomfort, replaying scenarios in an attempt to avoid pain. You think endlessly about what went wrong because aversion refuses to accept it. You rehearse future conversations because aversion fears embarrassment. Aversion turns thought into armor, but the more you resist, the more the thought persists. Meeting aversion requires softening into what you dislike instead of fleeing into analysis. By accepting that discomfort exists, you remove the energy that keeps the spiral alive. Sloth, or dullness of mind, hides behind overthinking more than people realize. When energy is low, the mind cannot hold steady attention. It drifts, sliding into repetitive thought because it lacks vitality. Overthinking here is not driven by desire or fear, but by inertia. The mind loops simply because it has no strength to remain present. Recognizing sloth reveals that the solution is not to solve the spiral, but to refresh energy. Rest, movement, and awareness break the dullness that keeps thought circling without clarity. Restlessness is perhaps the most obvious hindrance in overthinking. It is the agitation that refuses to sit still, the buzzing energy that leaps from one idea to the next. Restlessness convinces you that you must keep moving, keep scanning, keep preparing. The body feels jittery, the heart races, and the mind reflects that chaos with endless loops. Addressing restlessness means meeting the body as much as the mind, slowing the breath, grounding posture, creating calm in the nervous system. When the body settles, thought follows. Doubt is the most corrosive of all. It whispers, "You cannot do this. You will never be enough. You are failing even now." Doubt paralyzes action and fuels rumination because every choice seems unsafe. The mind replays endlessly because doubt never trusts any resolution. Unlike healthy questioning, this doubt is not curious but destructive. It feeds overthinking by keeping you trapped in indecision. To meet doubt, you must recognize it as a hindrance, not a truth. Doubt is a passing condition, not an identity. Naming it exposes it as just another fuel that need not be obeyed. These 5 hindrances do not appear separately. They weave together, strengthening one another. Desire for certainty pairs with doubt about your decisions. Aversion to discomfort combines with restlessness that seeks escape. Sloth dulls clarity, making doubt feel stronger. Seeing this interplay is crucial because overthinking is rarely fueled by one force alone. It is a knot of conditions, each feeding the loop. Vipassana practice offers a method for working with hindrances. By observing them directly, you shift from identification to recognition. Instead of saying, "I am restless," you note, "Restlessness is present." Instead of saying, "I cannot decide," you note, "Doubt is here." This language separates self from hindrance, showing that they are temporary states, not permanent truths. Once seen, their power weakens. Right effort also supports this work. Instead of suppressing hindrances, you guide energy toward wholesome states. Gratitude counterbalances desire. Acceptance softens aversion. Energy restores clarity when sloth is present. Stillness grounds restlessness. Confidence and faith counteract doubt. Each hindrance has an antidote, and applying it gently redirects the mind away from rumination. The most important point is that hindrances are universal. Everyone experiences them. They are not flaws, but conditions of the human mind. Recognizing them removes shame. You are not failing because you overthink. You are encountering the same hindrances the Buddha described centuries ago. This perspective reframes spirals as opportunities for practice rather than proof of weakness. In daily life, you can explore hindrances by asking, "What is fueling this loop right now?" If you are replaying a conversation, perhaps it is aversion to discomfort. If you are planning endlessly, perhaps it is desire for certainty. If you are circling without clarity, perhaps it is sloth or doubt. By naming the hindrance, you see the engine behind the spiral, and once you see the engine, you can choose to step off the ride. Overthinking feels overwhelming because it seems mysterious and uncontrollable. The 5 hindrances reveal its mechanics. Desire, aversion, sloth, restlessness, and doubt are the hidden roots. By shining awareness on them, you strip away their disguise. Spirals lose power because they are no longer invisible. They are just patterns, conditions, passing clouds. Seeing them clearly is the beginning of freedom, because what is seen cannot control you in the same way again. Seeing the 5 hindrances exposes the hidden engines of overthinking. Desire, grasping for certainty. Aversion, fleeing from discomfort. Sloth, dulling clarity. Restlessness, scattering attention. And doubt, eroding trust. Yet even when you name and soften these forces, the mind still has a way of convincing you that every small problem is urgent, that every minor worry deserves endless attention. What cuts through this illusion most directly is remembering what is ultimate: death. The practice of Maranasati, or death meditation, places life's fragility before you with honesty. Far from being morbid, it reframes worry by showing that repetitive thoughts lose their grip in the face of impermanence. Maranasati is not about despair, but about perspective. When you truly contemplate that life is finite, that breath itself is borrowed, anxious spirals appear in their true scale. The argument replayed for days, the imagined future scenarios, the self-criticism that never ends. None of these hold the same weight when viewed beside the reality that one day you will not be here to think them. The mind's urgency softens, not because you solved every worry, but because you see them against the vast backdrop of mortality. Contemplating death strips away illusion. Overthinking thrives on the belief that there is unlimited time to perfect, to prepare, to replay. Maranasati interrupts this by asking, if life could end tonight, would this worry matter? If breath is fragile, why waste it on repetition? The practice brings clarity by shifting attention from what is trivial to what is essential. It teaches that not every thought deserves energy, and that peace is found not in solving everything, but in letting go of what does not matter. This practice can begin with reflection. Sit quietly and bring to mind the truth that all beings die. Recall that the body will age, sicken, and eventually stop. At first, this may stir fear, but as you stay with it, fear gives way to clarity. You see that death is not an enemy, but a fact. You realize that the time for peace is now, not later. Overthinking loses its power because it thrives on postponement. One day I will resolve this. Maranasati shows that the only day you have is today. Another method is to bring death into awareness in daily life. When worry arises, ask, will this thought matter on my deathbed? If the answer is no, release it. This is not avoidance, but prioritization. It clears the mind of trivial loops and focuses energy on what truly matters: kindness, presence, connection, and awareness. Death, seen rightly, is not something that steals life, but something that sharpens it. Maranasati also dissolves fear of the unknown future. Many spirals are driven by the attempt to predict and control outcomes, but death itself is the greatest unknown, and it is certain. By contemplating it directly, you train yourself to rest in uncertainty without panic. If you can face the ultimate uncertainty, the smaller uncertainties of daily life lose their terror. The mind becomes calmer because it no longer exaggerates the weight of every possibility. This practice also deepens gratitude. When you reflect on mortality, every breath feels precious. Every moment with loved ones shines brighter. Worry about small inconveniences fades because the larger truth, life is fleeting, brings appreciation. Overthinking cannot coexist with gratitude. When you are deeply grateful, the spiral loosens. Maranasati turns attention away from what is missing toward what is already here. There is also compassion in this practice. Remembering death reminds you that everyone you meet is also fragile, also temporary. The colleague you resent, the stranger who annoys you, the loved one you argue with, all are living on borrowed time. This recognition softens anger and judgment. It shifts focus from endless mental arguments toward kindness. Overthinking loses its grip when compassion takes its place, because compassion anchors you in connection rather than isolation. Maranasati can be practiced formally in meditation. Sit and contemplate. This body will one day stop. This breath may be my last. Nothing I cling to will remain. As you reflect, notice the mind's reaction. Fear, sadness, even resistance may arise. Allow them. Over time, these reactions soften, replaced by equanimity. Death becomes less of a shadow and more of a teacher. The clarity it offers becomes steady, and worry fades because you have touched something deeper than fear. This practice also transforms procrastination. Overthinking often hides behind delay, thinking endlessly instead of acting. When you remember that time is finite, you act with courage. You speak the words of love. You take the step you feared. You live fully now. Death meditation removes the illusion that you can afford to stay trapped in spirals forever. It calls you back to action, not in panic, but in wisdom. Importantly, Maranasati is not about morbid obsession. It is about integration. By bringing death into awareness, you learn to live more fully. The presence of mortality does not darken life. It illuminates it. It teaches you to spend less energy on loops that drain and more on moments that nourish. Overthinking fades, not because thoughts stop, but because you stop giving them more value than they deserve. In the end, death meditation offers the most direct remedy for endless worry. It reveals that life's fragility makes every moment precious, that no spiral is worth the time it steals, and that peace is found not in endless preparation, but in presence. By contemplating death, you learn to live without postponement, to meet thoughts without clinging, and to rest in clarity beyond fear. Overthinking dissolves when you see that the only time you truly have is now, and that now is already enough. Reflecting on death places worry in its true perspective, stripping away the illusion that every small thought deserves endless attention. In the face of mortality, spirals lose their urgency. Yet once you see that life is fleeting, another door opens. How do you live lightly within this fragile existence? How do you keep the mind from turning every uncertainty into a burden? Here arises a surprising but powerful answer: humor. The Bodhisattva's smile, a gentle laugh at the absurdity of thought spirals, becomes not just a coping mechanism, but a spiritual practice. Overthinking thrives on seriousness. It tells you every detail is critical, every mistake catastrophic, every possibility a threat. It creates an atmosphere of weight where the smallest thought feels like a mountain. Humor punctures this heaviness. The Bodhisattva's smile is not mockery, but a light-hearted recognition that much of what the mind insists on is, at its core, absurd. When you see the exaggerated drama of your own spirals, you can laugh, not to dismiss them, but to soften them. That laughter is medicine. Consider how many worries collapse under the light of humor. The endless replay of a conversation, the imagined catastrophes, the self-critical scripts. When examined from the outside, they are often ridiculous. Humor allows you to step outside yourself, to see the spiral as a comedy rather than a tragedy. This shift breaks identification. The worry is no longer me, but a character in a play, and characters can be smiled at. The Bodhisattva's smile also holds compassion. It is not cruel laughter at weakness, but tender amusement at the shared human condition. Everyone worries, everyone spirals, everyone builds castles out of thoughts that collapse at a touch. Smiling at your own mind is an act of kindness, acknowledging that you are human and that humanity itself is beautifully imperfect. This compassion prevents humor from becoming cynicism. It lifts rather than cuts down. Humor also disrupts momentum. Overthinking depends on momentum, one thought feeding the next in a chain. A smile, a chuckle, interrupts the chain. It changes the emotional climate instantly. Where tension dominated, lightness appears. The spiral loses the fuel of solemnity. Even a small laugh at your own exaggerated predictions can derail hours of rumination. Humor is a form of mindfulness that uses joy rather than effort to bring you back to the present. In practice, this can be cultivated by exaggerating the spiral until its absurdity is clear. If the mind whispers, "What if I embarrass myself in the meeting?" you might inwardly reply, "Yes, and then they will exile me from the city, and I will live in the forest with squirrels as my jury." By pushing the thought to its extreme, you expose the comedy already hidden in it. The laugh that arises breaks the seriousness, and the worry loses power. Stories of Zen masters often include humor. A master may laugh at a student's confusion, not to belittle, but to show that the mind's struggles are smaller than they appear. The laughter is a teaching. Enlightenment is not grim, but free. The Bodhisattva's smile reminds you that liberation is lightness, the ability to meet even suffering with a grin. This is not denial of pain, but transcendence of its heaviness. Humor also trains resilience. When you can laugh at your own mind, you no longer fear it. Thoughts lose their intimidation. Even intrusive or anxious patterns become less threatening because you know you can smile at them. This resilience grows stronger with practice. Over time, spirals that once pulled you under become opportunities for a smile, and the smile itself becomes freedom. There is also wisdom in noticing that much of life is already humorous. The human tendency to replay mistakes, to worry about things that never happen, to argue with oneself for hours. These are universal absurdities. Seeing them as such creates connection. You laugh not only at yourself, but at the shared comedy of being human. This shared laughter builds compassion, dissolving shame and isolation. The Bodhisattva's smile is not forced cheerfulness. It is a natural response that arises when you see the mind's drama clearly. At first, you may need to practice intentionally, reminding yourself to lighten the spiral. Over time, the smile comes on its own, like sunlight breaking through clouds. When it appears, the whole inner atmosphere shifts. The storm of overthinking cannot survive in a sky filled with laughter. Humor also helps with humility. Overthinking often carries arrogance, the belief that your thoughts are uniquely complex or your problems uniquely serious. Smiling at the mind reveals that you are not so different. You are another human caught in the same loops as countless others. This humility is freeing. It removes the special weight you place on your own spirals, letting them dissolve into the shared play of existence. Even spiritual practice benefits from humor. The path can feel heavy if approached with constant seriousness, striving, judging, measuring progress. The Bodhisattva's smile reminds you that awakening is not about perfection, but about freedom. To laugh at the restless mind is itself a sign of wisdom. It shows that you no longer cling to it as your identity. Humor and enlightenment are not opposites. They walk hand in hand. To cultivate this in daily life, notice moments when worry becomes repetitive. Instead of tightening, try softening with a smile. Treat the spiral as a child making up stories, amusing, not threatening. Over time, this becomes natural. The mind still produces thoughts, but the heaviness is gone. What remains is lightness, ease, and the capacity to live fully without being weighed down by endless seriousness. The Bodhisattva's smile transforms overthinking by showing that you can meet your mind not only with patience and compassion, but with joy. Humor becomes a spiritual practice, one that disarms the most stubborn spirals. To laugh at the absurdity of worry is to see through it, and in that laughter, the heart remembers its natural state, free, light, and unburdened. The Bodhisattva's smile shows that laughter itself can be liberation, that lightness disarms the heaviness of rumination. Yet humor, while powerful, also points to something deeper, the need to see the roots of overthinking with the same clarity that the Buddha brought to suffering itself. If every spiral is a form of dukkha, then perhaps the framework the Buddha used to describe the human condition can also reveal the truth about restless thought. The Four Noble Truths, which have guided seekers for centuries, can be reframed to expose the nature of overthinking, its causes, its ending, and the path that leads to freedom. The first truth is recognition. Overthinking is suffering. Not metaphorically, not abstractly, but directly felt. It brings tension in the body, exhaustion in the mind, and endless dissatisfaction. You may replay conversations, rehearse decisions, or predict outcomes for hours, yet peace never comes. The truth is simple but radical. The restless mind hurts. This acknowledgement matters because much of the time you pretend it doesn't. You convince yourself that worrying is useful, that spiraling is productive. To see clearly that overthinking is suffering is the first step toward release. The second truth asks, what causes this suffering? Just as craving, clinging, and ignorance fuel all dukkha, they also fuel the loops of thought. The craving is for certainty, for control, for safety. The clinging is to identity. My problem, my mistake, my fear. The ignorance is the failure to see that thoughts are impermanent, insubstantial, not self. Together, these forces keep the wheel of overthinking turning. Each thought feels necessary because craving insists it will provide relief, clinging insists it defines you, and ignorance insists it is real. Without these forces, thoughts would pass like clouds. With them, they become storms. The third truth proclaims possibility, cessation. Just as suffering can end, overthinking can end. Not by erasing thought, but by seeing its true nature. When craving, clinging, and ignorance are weakened, spirals dissolve. You do not need to force silence. Silence arises naturally when you stop feeding restlessness. The cessation of overthinking is not an empty void, but a spaciousness, a calm presence where thoughts may still appear but no longer bind. This possibility is real, and even brief moments of release prove it. Every time you let go of a spiral before it grows, you taste cessation. The fourth truth is the path. The Buddha laid out 8 factors, and each applies directly to the restless mind. Right view, seeing that thoughts are not ultimate truths, but passing phenomena. Right intention, choosing gentleness rather than harshness in how you meet your mind. Right speech, reducing internal dialogue that feeds self-criticism. Right action, grounding yourself in presence rather than compulsive reaction. Right livelihood, creating external conditions that reduce agitation. Right effort, guiding energy wisely. neither suppressing nor indulging. Right mindfulness, observing thoughts without attachment. Right concentration, cultivating stability so attention no longer scatters. Each step of the path is a medicine for overthinking. Reframing overthinking through these truths transforms it from a personal flaw into a doorway of practice. Instead of asking, "Why am I like this?" you ask, "What is the truth here? What causes this? What ends it? What path leads me there?" This framework breaks shame and turns spirals into teachers. Every loop is an opportunity to recognize suffering, to see its cause, to glimpse its cessation, and to walk the path again. Applying this framework in daily life can be profound. The next time you catch yourself in a spiral, pause at the first truth. This is suffering. Name it honestly. Then look for the second. What craving or clinging is driving this? Perhaps it is the craving for reassurance, the clinging to reputation, the ignorance of impermanence. Then recall the third. This can end. The spiral is not permanent. Finally, practice the fourth. Bring mindfulness to the breath. Soften effort. Redirect with compassion. In this way, the Four Noble Truths become not just philosophy, but direct tools for transforming thought. Over time, this practice reshapes the mind. Recognition becomes quicker, causes become clearer, cessation becomes more frequent, and the path becomes natural. Overthinking no longer feels like a curse, but like a training ground for wisdom. Each spiral is another chance to live the truths the Buddha taught. This reframing does not romanticize suffering, it respects it. It shows that even in the restless chatter of the mind, the possibility of awakening is present. The Four Noble Truths are universal, and applying them to overthinking proves their timelessness. They reveal that spirals are not random, but conditioned, not fixed, but transformable. They show that peace is possible, not by force, but by wisdom. When you see overthinking through this lens, you no longer feel trapped. You see a path laid out clearly, one step at a time, leading from restlessness to freedom. Reframing overthinking through the Four Noble Truths shows that spirals are not mysterious forces, but conditions that can be understood, released, and transformed through a path of practice. Yet even with this wisdom, the restless mind often wants to keep doing, analyzing, fixing, applying methods, trying harder to get it right. This very effort can become another form of overthinking, another layer of complication. Zen offers an antidote to this tendency through Zazen, the practice of just sitting. It is a path so simple that the mind resists it at first, but in its simplicity lies the deepest freedom. Zazen is not about achieving a special state. It is not about controlling breath, suppressing thought, or chasing visions. It is sitting with no agenda, no goal, no demand. The body is upright, the breath moves naturally, thoughts come and go, and you remain present without interference. For an overactive mind, this feels almost impossible at first. How can sitting without doing anything be practice? Yet this is the point. Overthinking thrives on striving, and Zazen dismantles striving at the root. When you just sit, you confront the habit of making every moment a problem to solve. The mind says, "Am I doing this right? Should I focus harder? Why is this thought still here?" These are the same patterns that drive rumination. Zazen invites you to let them be, You do not push them away. You do not cling. You simply sit. In the beginning, this feels frustrating because the mind is addicted to effort. But over time, the simplicity begins to reveal its power. Thoughts lose urgency when you stop responding. Silence arises not by force, but by allowing. Zazen also teaches intimacy with reality as it is. Overthinking tries to improve, adjust, or prepare for life. Just sitting drops all of that. You meet breath as it is, body as it is, thought as it is. Nothing needs to change. This acceptance is radical for an overactive mind that always seeks to fix. By practicing radical acceptance in sitting, you train the same acceptance in daily life. Worries lose their grip because you no longer demand perfection before resting. This practice also dismantles the illusion of progress. Overthinking constantly asks, "Am I better yet? Am I closer to peace?" Zazen refuses this question. There is no closer, no farther. There is only sitting now. This breaks the cycle of measuring and judging, which fuels mental loops. In the absence of measurement, peace grows naturally, not because you earned it, but because you stopped chasing it away. The simplicity of Zazen can also reveal profound insight. When you stop interfering, awareness begins to show itself. You notice that thoughts rise and fall without control, that awareness itself remains steady. This is not something you achieve, it is something you recognize. Overthinking cannot survive long in this recognition because it depends on identification. Once you see awareness as the space in which thoughts move, the spirals lose their center. In practice, Zazen is straightforward. Sit with your back upright, hands resting, eyes soft. Breathe naturally. Do nothing special. When thoughts come, let them come. When they go, let them go. If attention wanders, return gently to sitting. That is all. The simplicity is the challenge and the gift. Nothing needs to be added. Daily practice of Zazen builds resilience. The more you sit without agenda, the less you are pulled by the need to fix every thought. You learn to live with openness rather than control. Overthinking fades, not because you forced it, but because you stopped feeding it. The habit of complication weakens, replaced by the art of being. In the end, Zazen shows that the cure for mental overcomplication is not another technique, but the courage to stop. To sit with nothing, to meet life as it is, to rest without demand. For the restless mind, this is the hardest practice, and yet it is also the most liberating. Just sitting unwinds the knots of thought until only presence remains, simple, alive, and free. Zazen reveals the strength of simplicity, the art of sitting without agenda, where peace emerges not from effort, but from the courage to stop striving. Yet for many, the cushion feels distant from daily life. The mind may still ask, how does this practice carry into my ordinary routines? How can I find stillness not only in formal sitting, but in the flow of everyday living? The answer lies in mindfulness brought to the smallest acts. Washing dishes, walking across a room, sipping a cup of tea. These moments, often dismissed as mundane, can become powerful doorways out of overthinking. Everyday mindfulness is not about creating new rituals, but about entering fully into the ones already there. Overthinking pulls you into abstraction, into past regrets and future predictions, while ordinary acts root you in direct experience. When you wash a dish, and truly feel the warmth of the water, the texture of the surface, the rhythm of the hands, thought loops dissolve because attention is fully here. No abstract meditation is required. The act itself becomes meditation. Walking offers the same medicine. Instead of letting the mind spin during a hurried step, you can bring awareness to the contact of foot with ground, the shift of weight, the sway of the body. Each step becomes an anchor. The spiral of thought loses momentum because awareness is tethered to movement. The body teaches the mind presence through rhythm and simplicity. Even the act of drinking tea holds potential. Most of the time, tea is consumed while scrolling, planning, or worrying. But if you slow down, feeling the cup's warmth, noticing the aroma, tasting each sip, your attention shifts from abstract thought to living sensation. The spiral of overthinking cannot continue when the senses are fully engaged. The cup of tea becomes not just a drink, but a practice of peace. The key is to recognize that mindfulness is not separate from daily life. It does not require retreat or special posture. It requires attention, openness, and willingness to meet the present as it is. Overthinking thrives on neglect of the present. Everyday acts, performed with awareness, dissolve this neglect. They return you to life directly, moment by moment. This practice also trains resilience. When you can be mindful in small acts, you build the strength to be mindful in larger challenges. Washing dishes becomes training for staying present in conflict. Walking with awareness becomes training for meeting anxiety with steadiness. Each small practice is a seed, and daily life provides countless opportunities to plant them. Everyday mindfulness also removes the division between practice and life. Many people think peace is reserved for meditation sessions, while daily life remains chaotic. But mindfulness in mundane acts shows that every moment is practice. Overthinking loses its special place because there is no gap where it can hide. Each ordinary task becomes a reminder to return. This approach also dissolves resistance. Some resist meditation because it feels abstract or difficult, but no one resists drinking tea or walking or washing. When those acts are infused with mindfulness, practice becomes natural. You do not need to create time for it. You only need to bring awareness to the time you already live. Over time, everyday mindfulness creates a rhythm of presence. The more you practice in small acts, the more naturally awareness arises in unplanned moments. Instead of spiraling automatically, you begin to return automatically. The habit of overthinking weakens because the habit of mindfulness grows stronger. In truth, mindfulness is not about extraordinary states, but about extraordinary attention to ordinary life. Washing a dish with full awareness can be more liberating than hours of abstract philosophy. Walking a single mindful step can free you from a spiral that has lasted all day. Sipping tea in silence can reveal peace already present. Overthinking is undone not only by great effort, but by simple presence in the life you already live. You've now walked through the full journey, 24 doors into Buddhist wisdom that dissolve the restless habit of overthinking. From the parable of the two arrows showing how suffering doubles in the mind, to the practice of noble silence, to the middle way that balances effort and ease, you've seen how beginner's mind breaks rigid loops, how karmic habits can be rewritten, and how non-clinging lets thoughts pass like guests who don't need to stay. You've learned to meet your mind with compassion, to recognize Mara's whisper, and to avoid mistaking the finger for the moon. You've discovered the grounding power of breath, the truth of interbeing, and the strange clarity of koans. You've touched radical patience, uncovered the 5 hindrances, and seen how even death meditation reframes endless worry. And finally, you've smiled with the Bodhisattva, reframed spirals with the 4 Noble Truths, sat in zazen with no agenda, and returned to everyday mindfulness in the simplest acts of life. Each teaching leads back to the same truth. Your thoughts are not prisons. They are passing clouds. You are the open sky. The more gently, curiously, and patiently you return to presence, the less power overthinking has. Tonight, as you rest, let these teachings settle into you. Let them soften the grip of the restless mind. Let them carry you into sleep, not with struggle, but with peace. Before you drift off, I'd love to hear from you. Which of these teachings touched you most deeply tonight? Leave a comment below. I read every one, and your reflections help shape future content. And if you want more wisdom like this to guide you toward peace, clarity, and better sleep, make sure to subscribe to the channel and tap the bell. That way, the next time your mind begins to race, you'll already have a place to return to. Now, rest well. Let go. The night is here to hold you.